At New Year's Eve dinner, my daughter-in-law handed me a plastic badge labeled Observer while her parents laughed over their crystal wine glasses. My son smirked and said food is for family contributors only. There was no chair for me at the table. I tossed the badge onto his steak and said 4 words that made the room go silent. Before I tell you how I evicted them all by midnight, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone who really signs the checks. The gravel crunched under the tires of my 15-year-old Ford pickup as I pulled into the circular driveway of the lakeside estate. It was a cold Atlanta evening, the kind that bites through your coat if you stand still too long. I parked my truck between a silver Bentley and a red Ferrari, intentionally leaving a little mud on the pristine pavement. The house loomed in front of me, a 3-story architectural marvel of glass and steel that glowed like a lantern against the dark water of the lake. It was the kind of house that screamed new money and old arrogance. I adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror. It was a simple tie bought at a department store years ago. My suit was clean, but the cut was from a different decade. To anyone looking at me, I was Winston Carter, a retired mechanic who lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment downtown and survived on a meager pension. That was the story I had let them believe for 5 years. It was a useful fiction. It kept the leeches away. Or so I thought. I walked up the stone steps, my knees protesting slightly against the cold. I could hear the music thumping from inside a jazz quartet playing something smooth and expensive. I rang the bell, and a server in a white tuxedo opened the door, looking me up and down with practiced indifference before stepping aside. The foyer was crowded with people holding champagne flutes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck. I scanned the room for my son Terrence. I spotted him near the grand staircase holding court with a group of investors. He looked good, I had to admit. His tuxedo was tailored perfectly to his frame, and he held his drink with the easy confidence of a man who believes he owns the world. He was 32 years old and the CEO of a tech startup that was the talk of the town. He thought he was a self-made man. He had no idea that the angel investor who had floated him $2 million to start the company was the same man who used to wipe grease off his hands to make him peanut butter sandwiches. I started to make my way toward him, but stopped when I saw his wife, Courtney. She was gliding through the crowd like a swan in a shimmering silver gown that probably cost more than my truck. She was laughing at something her father, Richard Whitman, was saying. Richard and his wife, Susan, were holding court near the fireplace. They were the kind of people who smiled with their teeth but never with their eyes. They came from old money, or at least the appearance of it, and they had never let me forget that my blood was too blue-collar for their liking. Terrence saw me approach. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a glitch in the matrix before he composed himself. He didn't come to greet me. He stayed where he was, forcing me to walk the entire length of the room to him. "Dad," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too performative. "You made it. I didn't think the old truck would handle the highway tonight." The group around him chuckled politely. I ignored the jab. "Happy New Year, son," I said, reaching out to shake his hand. He took my hand briefly, his grip limp. "Yeah, Happy New Year. Look, we're in the middle of a discussion about the Q1 projections. Why don't you go grab a soda from the bar?" He turned his back on me before I could answer. It was a dismissal, plain and simple. I stood there for a moment, feeling the heat rise in my neck. I was a former Marine. I had built a real estate empire from nothing, owning half the commercial warehouses in Chicago before moving south. I had faced down union strikes and hostile takeovers. And here was my son treating me like the hired help. I walked toward the bar, but before I could get there, Courtney intercepted me. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path with a smile that was as cold as the ice in the champagne bucket. "Winston," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "So glad you decided to show up. We were worried you might feel out of place." "I am fine, Courtney," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just came to have dinner with my family." "About that," she said, tilting her head. "We need to talk about the seating arrangements." She led me away from the main crowd toward the entrance of the dining hall. The long mahogany table was set for 20 people. There were floral centerpieces that looked like small forests and gold-rimmed plates that shone under the chandelier. "You see, Winston," she began, smoothing her dress, "this isn't just a party. This is a strategy dinner. Richard and Susan have invited some very important partners from the firm. We are going to be discussing the future of the Whitman and Carter alliance." I looked at the table, counting the chairs. There were 20 chairs. There were 20 place cards. I saw Richard. I saw Susan. I saw Terrence. I saw people I didn't recognize. I scanned every seat. My name was nowhere. I don't understand, I said. Courtney sighed, the kind of sigh you give a slow child. It is complicated business stuff, Winston. Things you would not understand. We need the seats for people who are contributing to the legacy, people with skin in the game. She reached into her small clutch and pulled out a lanyard. It was a cheap plastic badge on a black nylon string, the kind you get at a trade show convention. She held it out to me. So we came up with a solution, she said. You can stay, but you have to wear this. I looked at the badge. Printed on a white card in bold black letters was the word, Observer. I looked from the badge to her face. Is this a joke? No, she said, shoving it into my hand. It is a boundary. You can stay in the room and listen if you want, but you are not a participant. You are an observer. You do not speak unless spoken to, and you do not interrupt the business discussions. I felt a presence behind me. It was Richard and Susan Whitman. They had come over to watch the show. It is for the best, Winston Richards said, taking a sip of his bourbon. He was a large man with a red face and an arrogance that radiated off him like heat. We are talking high-level finance. We do not want you to feel embarrassed when the conversation goes over your head. Susan laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Besides, we cannot have you telling those dusty stories about fixing carburetors while we are trying to eat foie gras. It ruins the appetite. I looked at Terrence. He was standing a few feet away watching. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't telling his wife that this was disrespectful. He was just watching, terrified that standing up for his father might cost him his seat at the cool kids' table. Terrence, I said, my voice low, are you seeing this? Terrence swirled his wine, looking at the floor. Come on, Dad. Don't make a scene. Courtney is just trying to keep things organized. You know you don't know anything about corporate mergers. Just put the badge on. And where do I sit, I asked. Courtney pointed toward the corner of the room near the kitchen doors. There was a small folding stool there, the kind used for extra catering staff. You can sit there, she said, and don't worry. When we are done eating, we will have the staff pack up a plate for you. You can take it home. Richard says you probably need the groceries anyway. Richard chuckled. Consider it charity, Winston. We hate to see food go to waste. The room seemed to stretch and warp. The humiliation was absolute. They weren't just excluding me. They were stripping me of my dignity in front of the entire social circle. They were reducing me to a beggar in a house that I secretly owned. I looked down at the plastic badge in my hand. Observer. That is what they thought I was. A passive spectator in their lives, a wallet that had run dry, a relic to be managed. I closed my fingers around the badge. The plastic crunched. So that is how it is, I said quietly. Food is for family, Winston Susan said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. And family are the people who bring value to the table. You are just baggage. Terrence finally looked up. Dad, please, just go sit on the stool or go wait in the truck. You are embarrassing me. That was the moment. That was the snap. The final thread of fatherly patience that had held me back for years finally broke. I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation to please these people who despised his origins. I saw a man who had sold his soul for a lease on a luxury life he didn't pay for. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Courtney flinched as if I were reaching for a weapon. I pulled out a silver pen. I placed the plastic badge on the edge of the dining table. I clicked the pen open. What are you doing? Courtney snapped. Do not write on that. I need that for the next event. I ignored her. I flipped the badge over to the blank white side. I wrote 4 words in block capital letters. The ink bled slightly into the cheap paper. I picked up the badge and walked over to where Terrence was sitting. He had already started cutting into his appetizer. I dropped the badge right onto his plate. It landed with a soft slap directly on top of his seared scallops. He jumped back, dropping his fork. Dad, what the hell? Read it, I said. Terrence looked at the badge. He read the words out loud, his voice confused. Rent is due now. He looked up at me, a frown creasing his forehead. What? Courtney stormed over, snatching the badge off the plate. What is this supposed to mean? Are you going senile, old man? I straightened my jacket. I felt taller than I had in years. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It means the observation period is over, I said, my voice booming across the dining room loud enough for every guest to hear. It means the free ride has ended. Richard stepped forward, his face turning a darker shade of red. Listen here, you ungrateful old fool. You are ruining the ambiance. Get out before I have security throw you out. You don't have security, I said, looking him dead in the eye. You have a gate code that I pay for. You have an alarm system that is billed to my account. And you are standing on a floor that belongs to a holding company that I control. A murmur went through the room. The guests were whispering. Courtney let out a nervous laugh. He is crazy, she told the guests. He is having an episode. Ignore him. I looked at Terrence one last time. He looked small. He looked like a little boy who had just realized he lost his mother in the supermarket. You had a seat at the table, son, I said. I built the table. I carved the legs. I paid for the wood. And you just let them tell me I couldn't sit at it. Dad, wait, Terrence stammered, standing up. No, I said, turning my back on him. Enjoy the meal. It is the last one you are getting on the house. I walked toward the heavy oak front doors. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with confusion and the first creeping tendrils of fear. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew something had shifted. The atmosphere had changed from celebration to a pending storm. Terrence ran after me, catching up just as I reached the door. He grabbed my arm. Dad, stop being dramatic, he hissed. You are making me look like an idiot. Just apologize to Richard and go sit on the stool. We can talk about this tomorrow. I looked at his hand on my arm. I looked at his face. I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. There is no tomorrow, Terrence, I said. Not here. I pulled my arm free and pushed the door open. The cold night air hit me, cleansing the smell of their expensive cologne from my nose. I walked down the steps to my truck. Behind me, I heard the door open again, but I didn't look back. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The old Ford roared to life, a sound I trusted more than any person in that house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes to midnight. I dialed a number I had saved under speed dial 1. It rang twice before a woman answered. Her voice was sharp, professional, and alert. Sophia Morales here. It is Winston, I said, watching the lights of the mansion blazing in the rearview mirror. Happy New Year, Winston, Sophia said. Are we doing this? I shifted the truck into drive. Execute Clause 13, I said. Cut it all. Power, water, gas, and lock the perimeter gates. I want them trapped in the dark. Are you sure? Sophia asked. Once I hit execute, the system overrides everything. It cannot be undone until manual reset. I looked at the house one last time. I could see the silhouettes of the guests in the window, laughing, drinking my champagne, standing on my floors. I have never been more sure, I said. Do it. I hung up the phone and drove toward the main gate. As my truck passed through, the iron gates began to close slowly behind me. I checked my watch, 11:58. In 2 minutes the ball would drop. In 2 minutes the illusion of the Whitman family wealth would vanish. In 2 minutes my son would learn exactly what it costs to buy a seat at the table when you don't respect the carpenter. I turned onto the main road and accelerated into the darkness, leaving the explosion I had just lit behind me. The real party was just getting started. I drove my truck to a small overlook about a quarter-mile down the road. From here I had a perfect view of the estate, sitting on the edge of the lake like a lit jewel box. The engine idled quietly, sending puffs of white exhaust into the freezing night air. My phone was pressed to my ear and Sophia was on the other end waiting for my final confirmation. I want you to understand exactly what this means, Sophia said, her voice cutting through the static. The property is held by Carter Holdings, LLC. The lease agreement Terrence signed 5 years ago was symbolic, $1 a month. But page 42, paragraph 7 clearly states that the tenant must maintain the property and conduct themselves with dignity befitting the family name. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Dignity. They stripped that from me tonight, Sophia. They put a plastic badge on me like I was cattle. They violated the morality clause. Initiate the shutdown. Copy that, Winston. Executing now. I hung up and checked the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 11:59. Inside that house, they were probably counting down, raising their crystal glasses, preparing to kiss their spouses and toast to another year of unearned prosperity. They were warm. They were comfortable. They felt secure in a house they believed was theirs by right of existence. 10 seconds. I watched the house. I could almost hear the chant. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year, I whispered to the empty cab of my truck. At exactly 12:01, The entire estate plunged into darkness. It was instant and total. And 1 second, the house was a beacon of golden light illuminating the manicured lawns and the expensive cars in the driveway. The next second, it was a black void against the night sky. The only light came from the moon reflecting off the lake water. I rolled down my window to listen. For a moment, there was absolute silence, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Then the confusion started. I saw the faint glow of cell phone flashlights flickering inside the windows like panicked fireflies. But the darkness was only the first step. The smart home system which I had installed and personally coded linked to the main breaker and the security grid. When the power cut, the backup generators were programmed to remain silent. The heating system, which pumped warmth through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, shut down immediately. In a glass house like that, with temperatures dropping below freezing outside, the cold would seep in within minutes. Then came the sound of the perimeter gates. The heavy iron gates at the end of the driveway began to grind shut. I watched through my binoculars as the magnetic locks engaged with a heavy clank. The guests were trapped. Those Ferraris and Lamborghinis were low to the ground and useless against a locked iron barrier. They were stuck in the cold with no way out and no heat to keep them warm. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. It was Terrence. I let it ring. I picked up my thermos and poured myself a cup of coffee. I watched the chaos unfold from my vantage point. I saw the front door open. A group of guests spilled out into the driveway, holding their phones up, trying to find a signal or see what was happening. They were shivering in their tuxedos and backless gowns. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving only cold discomfort. My phone stopped ringing, then started again immediately. It was Terrence again. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness before I answered. "Hello, son," I said, my voice calm. "Dad, what did you do?" Terrence screamed. The signal was spotty, but his panic came through loud and clear. "The power is out. Everything is dead. The heat, the lights, the Wi-Fi. Even the security gates are locked. We are trapped in here." "That sounds like a problem," I said. "Did you touch the fuse box before you left?" He accused, his voice shrill. "Courtney says you were messing around near the utility closet. You broke something because you were mad about the badge, didn't you?" "Fix it, Dad. Come back here and fix it right now. We have investors here. We have the mayor here." I leaned back in my seat. "I am not coming back, Terrence. And I did not break anything. I simply terminated the service." "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "You seem to be under the impression that you own that house," I said. "You do not. You signed a lease agreement 5 years ago with a company called Carter Holdings, LLC. You assumed it was just some faceless corporate entity I found to manage the paperwork. You never bothered to look up who the principal owner of Carter Holdings is." There was a silence on the line, a long, heavy silence as the gears in his head tried to turn through the panic and the alcohol. "What are you saying?" Terrence whispered. "I am saying that I am the landlord, Terrence. I bought that house. I renovated it. I set up the LLC to give you a place to live for $1 a month so you could build your company without worrying about a mortgage. I subsidized your life so you could become a man. But tenants have rules, and tonight you violated the most important one. You cannot do this," he stammered. "It is freezing. We have guests. This is illegal." "Actually, it is perfectly legal," I countered, my voice hardening. "Read your contract. Clause 13 allows the landlord to suspend all utilities and secure the premises immediately upon evidence of gross misconduct or disrespect to the property owner. You stripped me of my seat at the table, Terrence. You treated the owner of the house like a beggar, so now you are just a tenant in arrears. Dad, please, Courtney is freaking out. Her parents are threatening to sue." "Let them sue," I said. "They can sue Carter Holdings. My lawyers are ready. But right now you have a house full of cold, angry people and no way to open the gate. I suggest you start handing out blankets. The temperature is dropping fast." I hung up the phone. I did not feel satisfaction exactly. I felt a heavy, grim resolve. It was the feeling of a surgeon cutting out a gangrenous limb to save the patient. It hurts, but it is necessary. I sat there for another 10 minutes watching the scene deteriorate. I could see arguments breaking out in the driveway. People were getting into their cars, turning on the engines to try and use the car heaters, but without the ability to leave the driveway, was turning into a parking lot of exhaust fumes and frustration. Then I saw the blue lights. A police cruiser was coming up the main road, moving fast. Courtney must have called 911. I watched as the cruiser slowed down, approaching the locked gate. The officer got out, shining his flashlight through the bars. He could see the crowd of wealthy people trapped inside. I started my truck and drove slowly down from the overlook, pulling up behind the police cruiser. I stepped out, keeping my hands visible. The officer turned his hand, resting on his holster. He was young, maybe late 20s, and he looked overwhelmed by the sight of a locked mansion and a crowd of people in tuxedos screaming at him through the bars. "Sir, stay back," the officer warned. "Officer, I am Winston Carter," I said calmly, reaching into my jacket pocket slowly to pull out a leather folder. "I believe I can explain what is going on here. I am the property owner." The officer looked at me. He saw an old black man in a dated suit standing next to a beat-up Ford truck. Then he looked through the gate at the screaming white woman in the silver dress. It was Courtney. She had spotted me. "Officer, arrest him!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "That is him. That is the man who sabotaged the house. He is a vandal. He is trespassing. He is crazy." The officer looked back at me confused. "Is that true, sir? Do you know these people?" I opened the folder. Inside were the deed to the house, the articles of incorporation for Carter Holdings, LLC, and a copy of the lease agreement signed by Terrence. "That is my daughter-in-law," I said, handing the papers to the officer. "And unfortunately, she is mistaken. I am not trespassing. This is my property. I have simply initiated a lockout procedure due to a breach of contract. Here is the proof of ownership, and here is the utility account in my name. I have the right to control the services paid for by my account." The officer took the papers and shone his flashlight on them. He read the deed. He checked the names. He looked at the signature on the lease. He was a professional. He knew that property disputes were civil matters, not criminal ones. He walked over to the gate where Courtney was gripping the bars like a prisoner. "Ma'am," he said, his voice projecting over her screaming. "I have reviewed the documentation. This gentleman is the legal owner of the property. He has proof that he pays the utilities and owns the land. This is a civil dispute between a landlord and a tenant. I cannot arrest him for turning off his own lights." Courtney's face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. "That is a lie," she screamed, spitting the words. "He is a broke mechanic. He does not own anything. He is lying to you. Look at him. Look at his truck. He is a fraud." The officer turned back to me, handing me the folder. He looked at my truck, then back at the deed. He tipped his hat slightly. "Everything seems to be in order, Mr. Carter. However, we have a safety issue here. You have guests trapped. I am going to have to ask you to open the gate so these people can leave." I nodded. "Of course, officer. I have no intention of keeping them prisoner. I just wanted to make sure the tenants understood the situation." I pulled out my phone and tapped the security app. The heavy iron gates groaned and began to slide open. As the gates opened, the guests wasted no time. They scrambled for their cars. Engines roared and tires squealed as the fleet of luxury vehicles began to stream out of the driveway, desperate to escape the cold and the embarrassment. Courtney stood alone in the driveway, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering violently. Her parents, Richard and Susan, were right behind her, looking pale and small in the headlights of the fleeing cars. Terrence walked up to stand beside them. He looked at me past the police officer. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked stunned. I walked up to the open gate, stopping just outside the property line. The officer got back into his cruiser, ready to leave now that the immediate danger was resolved. I looked at Courtney. Her makeup was running. Her perfect hair was windblown. "You called the police on me, Courtney," I said, my voice low and hard. "You tried to have me arrested on my own land." "It is not your land," she hissed through chattering teeth. "It is Terrence's house. You are just a sad old man playing games." "Ask him," I said, pointing at Terrence. "Ask him who signed the lease. Ask him who pays the property taxes. Ask him who has been covering the mortgage for 5 years because his startup has not turned a profit yet." Courtney turned to Terrence. Her eyes were wide, pleading with him to deny it. "Terrence, tell him. Tell him he is lying." Terrence looked down at his shoes. He could not meet her gaze. He could not meet mine. "It is true, Courtney," he whispered. "He owns it. All of it." Richard Whitman stepped forward, his face purple with cold and indignation. "This is preposterous. You lured us here under false pretenses. I will have your hide for this, Winston. I will sue you for everything you have." "You have nothing to sue for, Richard," I said. "And speaking of debts, check your email. My accounting department just sent over a notice regarding the supply chain invoices your construction firm has outstanding with Carter Industrial Supply. $200,000, Richard." You have been dodging my collections team for months. I suggest you pay up before I place a lien on your personal assets." Richard's jaw dropped. "You," he stammered, "you are Carter Industrial. I own the supply chain you depend on." "Richard," I said, "I own the roof over your head, Terrence. And Courtney, I own the very ground you are standing on." I turned back to my truck. "I suggest you all find a hotel," I said over my shoulder. "The power is not coming back on tonight, and Terrence rent is due on the 1st. Do not be late." I climbed into my truck and drove away, leaving them standing in the dark driveway, illuminated only by the taillights of their fleeing friends. The bridge was burned. The war had begun. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the man I used to be. The Observer was gone. The boss was back. The sun rose over Atlanta, reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my 42nd floor penthouse. It was a stark contrast to the freezing driveway I had left hours ago. I sat in my Eames lounge chair sipping Blue Mountain coffee that cost $50 a bag. My old Ford truck was parked in the private garage downstairs next to my Rolls-Royce Phantom, but up here, I was not the mechanic. I was the chairman. I scrolled through the financial reports on my tablet. Carter Industrial Supply had a massive accounts receivable list. One name stood out in red ink: Whitman Construction. Richard Whitman, my daughter-in-law's father, the man who called me baggage. I tapped on his file. He owed $214,000 for lumber and steel beams delivered 3 months ago. He had been dodging calls from my billing department claiming cash flow issues while throwing lavish parties and driving a leased Bentley. He thought he was playing games with a faceless corporation. He did not know he was stealing from the man he kicked out of his dinner party. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was gone. All I tasted now was opportunity. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. It was a notification from the Ring doorbell camera installed at my decoy address. It was a small 2-bedroom bungalow in a working-class neighborhood, the place I told Terrence I lived to keep him from asking for money. On the screen, I saw Richard, Susan, and Courtney standing on the cracked concrete porch. They looked disheveled. Their expensive clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in a hotel or perhaps their car. Richard pounded on the peeling paint of the front door. "Open up, Winston," he shouted, his face distorted by the fisheye lens. "We know you are in there hiding like a rat." Susan was looking around nervously, clutching her purse as if the neighborhood itself was going to mug her. "This is disgusting," she hissed. "I cannot believe we have to come to this slum to deal with him." Courtney was typing furiously on her phone. My phone buzzed again. A text message from her. "You are going to pay for the hotel bill and the emotional distress you caused my parents. If you do not open this door right now, we are calling the police and suing you for endangerment." I watched them on the screen, sipping my coffee. They were banging on the door of an empty house where the only furniture was a thrift store couch and a dusty TV. They were screaming at a ghost. Richard kicked a plastic flower pot off the porch. "You will regret this, Winston," he roared at the empty house. "I am going to bury you in legal fees. You messed with the wrong family." I chuckled softly. He was right about one thing. Someone had messed with the wrong family. I closed the camera app and opened my secure email server. I typed Richard's email address into the recipient field. I did not write a long, angry letter. I did not mention the party or the badge. I simply attached the 4 outstanding invoices stamped past due in bright red. In the subject line, I wrote notice of default and intent to lien. The body of the email was a template my lawyers had drafted years ago for situations like this, but I added a personal touch. "Dear Mr. Whitman, your account with Carter Industrial Supply is 90 days past due. The total outstanding balance is $214,560. Effective immediately, your credit line is revoked. Please remit the full balance via wire transfer within 24 hours. Failure to pay will result in the immediate filing of a mechanic's lien against your current construction projects and the seizure of all delivered inventory. Governed by the laws of the state of Georgia. Sincerely, Winston Carter, Chairman, Carter Industrial Supply." I hit send. It was 10 a.m. on New Year's Day. Most banks were closed, but I knew Richard moved money through offshore channels to hide assets. He could pay if he was scared enough, and he was about to be very scared. I watched the read receipt notification pop up on my screen less than a minute later. He had opened it. I imagined the color draining from his face as he realized the supplier holding his business by the throat was the same man he had called a fool 12 hours ago. While Richard was likely hyperventilating over his email, my son was trying to salvage his marriage across town. My private banking alert system pinged. Attempted transaction. $350. The location was Le Jardin, a trendy brunch spot where a mimosa cost $20. Terrence was trying to buy forgiveness with an omelet. He was using the Centurion Black card I had given him as an authorized user. He told his friends he earned it through his startup success, but in reality I paid the $5,000 annual fee and the monthly bills. I tapped the notification on my screen. Status active. I switched it to stolen. Back at the restaurant, the scene played out exactly as I anticipated. Terrence smiled at the waiter, handing over the heavy titanium card with a flourish, trying to impress his angry in-laws. "It is on me, Richard," he probably said. "Let me make up for last night." The waiter walked away and returned a moment later with a frown. "I am sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice carrying through the quiet restaurant. "This card has been declined. The issuer reports it as stolen. I have to confiscate it." Terrence stood up, knocking his chair over. "That is impossible. Run it again. It is my card." The waiter shook his head, holding the card out of reach. "I cannot, sir. It is flagged." "Do you have another form of payment?" Terrence froze. He didn't. His personal cards were maxed out. Courtney looked at him with pure disgust. "You are useless," she hissed loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "First your father ruins the party, and now you cannot even buy us pancakes. You are a joke, Terrence." Richard threw a napkin on the table. "This is the last straw. I am leaving." Susan grabbed her purse. "Fix this, Terrence, or do not bother coming back to our hotel." They walked out, leaving my son standing alone in the center of the restaurant, humiliated, broke, and realizing for the first time that the leash he had been wearing was attached to my hand. The Oakwood Country Club was supposed to be their fortress of solitude. It was the one place in Atlanta where the Whitman family felt untouchable. The membership fee was $50,000 a year, and the vetting process was more rigorous than a top-secret security clearance. They went there to lick their wounds and pretend that the morning had not happened. They sat on the patio overlooking the 18th hole, drinking scotch and complaining about the injustice of the world. I knew they would be there. It was predictable. When people like Richard and Susan feel threatened, they retreat to places that reinforce their sense of superiority. They needed to see waiters bowing and hear the clink of expensive glass to remind themselves that they were still the elite. They believed I could not touch them here. To them, I was just a mechanic who changed their oil, a man who belonged in a garage, not on a golf course. They thought the iron gates of Oakwood would keep the reality of their situation at bay. I pulled my Rolls-Royce Phantom up to the valet stand. I usually drove the truck to maintain my cover, but the cover was blown. Today I was not the observer. I stepped out of the car wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost $6,000. The fabric was midnight blue, the cut impeccable. I adjusted my silk tie and walked up the steps. The valet nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." I handed him the keys and a $100 bill. "Keep it close, I won't be long." I walked through the mahogany doors into the cool air of the clubhouse. The smell of old leather and money filled the air. I nodded to the concierge, who smiled and gestured toward the patio. "They are just outside, sir." I stepped onto the terrace. The winter sun was bright, but the outdoor heaters made the air comfortable. The patio was crowded with the city's power players, judges, senators, CEOs. And in the center of it all was the Whitman family. Richard was red-faced, gesturing wildly with a cigar. Susan was dabbing at her eyes with a linen napkin. Courtney and Terrence sat in sullen silence, staring at their phones. I walked straight to the table next to theirs. It was the best table on the patio, reserved for the club's board members. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Courtney looked up. Her eyes went wide. She blinked as if she were seeing a ghost. Then her shock turned to pure, unadulterated fury. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the stone floor, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "You!" she screeched. "What are you doing here? Did you follow us?" I picked up the menu the waiter had placed in front of me. I did not look at her. "I am having lunch, Courtney. The crab cakes here are excellent." Richard turned in his seat, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You have got to be kidding me. You stalked us here. This is a private club, Winston. You cannot just waltz in here off the street because you put on a fancy suit. You are trespassing." "Get out!" Courtney hissed, pointing at the exit. "Get out before we have you arrested again. Do you have any idea who the members are here? This isn't a diner. You don't belong here." I calmly unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. "I believe I have every right to be here," I said. "You have no rights here," Richard spat. "Security!" He waved his hand frantically at a passing waiter. "Get security over here immediately. There is a vagrant harassing us." The waiter looked confused. He looked at Richard, then at me, then back at Richard. "Sir, do not just stand there," Richard roared, standing up to join his daughter. "This man is a truck driver. He is not a member. He is stalking my family. Remove him from the premises now, or I will have your job." Terrence looked at me. His eyes were pleading. "Dad, please, just go. Do not make this worse. You can't win here. These people are powerful." I looked at my son. He still didn't get it. He still thought power was loud. He still thought power was screaming at waiters. "I am not going anywhere, Terrence," I said. Courtney grabbed a glass of water from the table. "If you don't leave, I am going to make you leave. You are humiliating us. You are a sad, pathetic old man who is obsessed with ruining our lives because you are jealous. You are jealous that we belong here and you don't." She looked ready to throw the water. The entire patio had gone silent. Everyone was watching. The senators, the judges, the CEOs. They were all watching the Whitman family melt down. Security finally arrived. 2 large men in black blazers walked onto the patio. Courtney smiled triumphantly. "There," she said, pointing at me. "That is him. Throw him out, and make sure he never comes back." The security guards stopped. They looked at me. They didn't move toward me. They didn't reach for my arms. They stood at attention and nodded. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter," one of them said. "Is there a problem?" Courtney's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" "Why are you talking to him?" I said, "Throw him out. He is not a member." Actually, the voice came from behind them. It was smooth, calm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. It was Arthur Sterling, the club's general manager. He walked onto the patio, adjusting his cuffs. "Arthur," Richard said, relief washing over his face. "Thank God. You need to handle this. This man is trespassing. He is harassing my family." Arthur ignored Richard. He walked straight to my table. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect that rippled through the watching crowd. "Mr. Carter," Arthur said, "it is an honor to see you. We did not know you would be dining with us today. I would have had the chef prepare the private room." I smiled. "That is quite all right, Arthur. I prefer the fresh air today, although the company leaves something to be desired." Courtney looked like she had been slapped. "Arthur, what is going on? Do you know who this is?" "This is Winston Carter. He is a mechanic." Arthur turned to face her. His expression was cold. "Mrs. Hughes, I am well aware of who Mr. Carter is. Mr. Carter is a founding member of the new ownership group. He sits on the board of directors. In fact, Mr. Carter owns a 30% stake in this club." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. You could hear the wind rustling the leaves of the oak trees. Richard slumped back into his chair. "Owns," he whispered. "Yes," Arthur continued. "Mr. Carter essentially signs my paycheck. So, when he decides to have lunch on his patio, he is not trespassing. He is inspecting his investment." I looked at Terrence. His mouth was open. He was looking at me as if I had just ripped off a mask and revealed I was an alien. "Dad," he croaked, "you own the golf club." "I diversified my portfolio a few years ago," I said, casually picking up my water glass. "Real estate is good, but luxury leisure services are recession-proof. You would know that if you ever asked me about my day instead of just asking for money." Arthur turned his attention to Richard. His demeanor shifted from deferential to icy professionalism. He pulled a small, discreet envelope from his jacket pocket. "Mr. Whitman, since you are here, there is a matter we need to discuss." Richard looked at the envelope warily. "What is it?" "Your membership card was flagged this morning," Arthur said loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "We attempted to run your automatic monthly dues as well as the tab from your brunch earlier today. Both transactions were declined by your bank. The error code indicates a freeze on your assets due to a significant outstanding lien." "Lien," Richard stammered, his face draining of color. "That is impossible. There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Arthur said, handing him the envelope. "Our policy is very strict regarding solvency. Members must maintain good standing with their creditors. Given the alert regarding the insolvency of Whitman Construction and the mechanics lien filed this morning by Carter Industrial Supply, we have no choice but to suspend your membership effective immediately. Courtney gasped. Suspended? But we are legacy members. You can't kick us out. I am afraid we can, Arthur said. And we have. You are no longer welcome on the premises until the debt is resolved and your financial standing is reevaluated by the board, which, as you now know, includes Mr. Carter. I took a sip of my water, enjoying the look of absolute horror on Richard's face. He was looking at the envelope in his hand like it was a death warrant. He knew exactly what Lee and Arthur was talking about. He knew exactly who had frozen his accounts. You did this? Richard whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. You destroyed my credit. You got me kicked out of my club. I simply called in a debt, Richard, I said. Business is business. You taught me that last night, remember? Food is for family contributors, and clubs are for solvent members. You are neither. Arthur gestured to the security guards. Please escort Mr. Whitman and his guests to the exit. Don't touch me, Susan shrieked, pulling her arm away as a guard stepped forward. This is humiliating. I am going to sue all of you. You can try, I said, but you will need a lawyer. And lawyers cost money, something you do not seem to have right now. Terrence stood up. He looked from me to Arthur to his in-laws. He was vibrating with shock and indecision. Dad, he said, his voice trembling, please stop this. You made your point. Fix it. I looked at him. I saw the weakness. I saw the refusal to take responsibility. He still wanted me to fix it. He still wanted Daddy to make the bad things go away. I cannot fix who they are, Terrence, I said, and I cannot fix who you chose to become. The security guards moved in closer. Sir Arthur said to Richard, his voice leaving no room for argument, It is time to go. Richard stood up, his legs shaking. He looked old. All the bluster, all the arrogance had drained out of him, leaving a frightened elderly man in a suit he could no longer afford. Come on, he muttered to Susan and Courtney. Let's go. They started to walk away, a pathetic parade of defeated snobs. Courtney stopped and looked back at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. I hate you, she screamed. I hate you. I know, I said calmly, but you will remember me. Terrence lingered for a second longer. He looked at me one last time. He looked at the man he thought was a simple mechanic and saw a titan he had never bothered to know. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again. There were no words left. He turned and followed his wife. His head hung low. I watched them leave, escorted out like common hooligans. The patio was silent for another moment, and then slowly the conversation resumed. The judges and the CEOs went back to their drinks, but their eyes kept darting toward me. There was a new respect in their gazes, of fear. They knew now that the quiet man in the corner was not to be trifled with. Arthur turned back to me. My apologies for the disturbance, Mr. Carter. Will you be dining alone? I looked at the empty seat across from me, the seat where my son could have been if he had been a different man. Yes, Arthur, I said. I will be dining alone. Bring the crab cakes, and a bottle of the best champagne you have. I have a victory to celebrate. As I sat there waiting for my food, I felt a profound sense of loneliness wash over me. I had won. I had crushed them. I had taken back my dignity. But the chair across from me was empty, and as I looked out over the perfectly manicured greens of the golf course, I realized that the price of respect was high, but it was a price I was willing to pay, because the alternative was being an observer in my own life. And that was something I would never be again. My private office at the Carter Industrial Headquarters was a space few people ever saw. It was located behind an unmarked door on the top floor of a nondescript brick building in downtown Atlanta. To the outside world, it looked like a boring logistics center. Inside, it was a command center fitted with mahogany walls and screens monitoring global supply chains. I was reviewing the quarterly projections for my shipping division when the heavy oak door slammed open. I did not look up. I knew who it was. The security guard downstairs had buzzed me 2 minutes ago, warning me that a frantic man was coming up the elevator. Terrence stood in the doorway, breathing hard. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loose, and his eyes were wild with a mixture of rage and panic. He looked like a man who had been running from a ghost all day. He marched across the Persian rug and slammed a handful of black titanium shards onto my desk. They skidded across the polished wood and came to a rest next to my coffee cup. It was the Centurion card, or what was left of it. "Fix it," he demanded, his voice cracking. "Fix it right now." I slowly closed the file I was reading and clasped my hands on the desk. I looked at the broken pieces of the card, then up at my son. "Hello, Terrence," I said, calm as a frozen lake. "I see you found the office. I assume you bullied the receptionist." "Don't play games with me, Dad," Terrence shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You humiliated me at brunch. You cut off my card in front of Richard and Susan. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" The waiter cut it up right at the table. "I imagine it was very embarrassing," I agreed. "Theft usually is." "Theft," he sputtered. "It is my card. It is issued to me. You had no right to report it stolen. That is fraud, Dad. I could have you arrested for filing a false police report." I leaned back in my leather chair. "Actually, Terrence, that card is issued to the primary account holder. That would be me. You are an authorized user. A privilege I extended to you so you would have emergency funds for your business. An omelet at Le Jardin is not an emergency. And neither is buying your father-in-law's forgiveness. You are ruining everything," he yelled, pacing the room like a caged animal. "My investors are calling me. They heard rumors about the house. They heard rumors about Richard's club membership. They are getting nervous. If I don't project stability, the stock valuation is going to tank. I need that card active. I need liquidity. Turn it back on." I watched him pace. He was so consumed by his own narrative. He truly believed he was the victim here. He believed he was a titan of industry being unfairly persecuted by a jealous father. It was time to shatter the last mirror in his house of illusions. "Sit down, Terrence," I said. "I don't want to sit," he snapped. "I want my credit line restored." "Sit down," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "Or I call security and have you dragged out before you hear what I have to say. And trust me, you want to hear this." Something in my tone penetrated his hysteria. He stopped pacing. He looked at the chair opposite my desk the same way a condemned man looks at the electric chair. Slowly he sat down, gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. I opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, bound document. It was about 300 pages heavy with charts and spreadsheets. I dropped it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the quiet office. The cover simply read, "Omega Fund Q4 Audit." "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Terrence glanced at it dismissively. "It looks like a financial report." "What does this have to do with my credit card?" "Everything," I said. "Tell me, Terrence, who is the lead investor in your tech startup? Who provided the $2 million in seed capital that allowed you to launch 3 years ago?" Terrence rolled his eyes. "You know who it is." "The Omega Fund. It is a private equity group out of Silicon Valley. They saw the potential in my algorithm. They believed in my vision." I nodded slowly. "And have you ever met the board of directors for the Omega Fund? Have you ever shaken hands with the chairman?" "No," Terrence said, defensive now. "They prefer to remain silent partners. They trust me to run the company. That is standard in tech." "Silent partners," I repeated. I reached for the report and flipped it open to the first page. It was the Articles of Incorporation for the Omega Fund. I turned the book around so he could read it. "Look at the signature line, Terrence." He leaned forward, squinting. He read the name. Then he read it again. He blinked rapidly as if his brain was refusing to process the visual input. "Winston Carter." He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible. You are a mechanic. You fix trucks. You don't have $2 million. "I haven't fixed a truck in 15 years, son," I said. "I own the company that manufactures the parts. I own the warehouses that store them, and I own the Omega Fund. I am your angel investor, Terrence. I am the only investor. There is no Silicon Valley group. There is just me." He sat back in his chair, stunned. "You gave me the money." "I invested in you," I corrected him. "I set up the fund anonymously because I wanted you to succeed on your own merits. I didn't want you to be the boss's son. I wanted you to be the CEO who earned his backing. I wanted to give you the chance to build something real without the shadow of my name hanging over you." He stared at me, the realization washing over him. The office, the staff, the marketing budget. It all came from you. Every cent, I said. And for 3 years, I stayed silent. I watched from the sidelines. I wore that plastic badge you gave me, and I kept my mouth shut because I thought you were building a future. I thought you were working hard. "I am working hard," Terrence protested, his voice returning but weaker now. "We are disrupting the market. We have projections." I reached for another folder. This one was thinner but far more damning. It was the forensic accounting report my auditors had compiled over the last 48 hours. "Let's talk about those projections," I said, flipping the folder open. "Or rather, let's talk about the burn rate." I audited the books, Terrence. I looked at where the Omega Fund's capital has actually gone. I slid a spreadsheet across the desk. I highlighted the line items in yellow. $75,000 classified as consultant fees paid to a shell company registered to Courtney's college roommate. $20,000 for office supplies that cross-references with receipts from Hermes and Louis Vuitton. A corporate retreat in the Maldives that cost $150,000 where the only attendees were you and your wife. Terrence turned pale. That was networking, he stammered. We were meeting potential clients. You were drinking margaritas on a private beach, I said, my voice hardening. You bought your wife a Birkin bag with funds designated for research and development. You leased a Bentley for her father under the company name as a transport vehicle. You have been treating my investment like a personal piggy bank, Terrence. It is not what it looks like, he tried to argue, sweat beading on his forehead. As CEO, I have discretion over operational expenses. These are perks. Everyone does it. Not with my money, they don't, I roared, slamming my hand on the desk. This isn't perks, Terrence. This is embezzlement. You are misappropriating investor funds for personal gain. You are defrauding the Omega Fund. And since I am the Omega Fund, you are stealing from me. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city I had helped build. I felt a deep aching sadness in my chest. I had wanted so badly for him to be a good man. I had paved the road for him, removed the obstacles, given him every advantage I never had, and he had used it to become a thief. I turned back to him. He was shrinking in his chair, looking smaller by the second. I am pulling the plug, Terrence, I said. He looked up, terrified. What? I am triggering the clawback clause in the investment agreement, I said. Section 8, paragraph 4. Material breach of fiduciary duty, gross mismanagement of funds. The Omega Fund is withdrawing its capital effective immediately. I am calling the loan. You can't do that, he cried, standing up. The company will collapse. We don't have the cash reserves to pay you back. We will go bankrupt. Then you go bankrupt, I said coldly. But that isn't your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is the fraud. I have already drafted the complaint for the district attorney. Embezzlement of funds over $100,000 is a felony, Terrence. You are looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Prison. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Dad, you wouldn't, he whispered. I am your son. You ceased to be my son the moment you let your wife put an observer badge on my chest, I said. You ceased to be my son when you watched them laugh at me and did nothing. You chose your family, Terrence. You chose the Whitmans. You chose the lifestyle. Now you can pay the price for it. I picked up the phone on my desk. I am going to call my legal team. They will file the civil suit for the money and the criminal complaint for the fraud by close of business today. Unless... I let the word hang there. Terrence scrambled around the desk. He dropped to his knees. He actually fell to his knees on my Persian rug, grabbing my hand with both of his. Tears were streaming down his face, ruining his expensive suit. Dad, please, don't do this. I will do anything. I will pay it back. I will sell the car. I will fix it. Please don't send me to jail. I can't go to jail. Courtney will leave me. My life will be over. I looked down at him. This sobbing, broken man. He was pathetic. He was weak. And he was exactly what I had allowed him to become by protecting him from the world. Get up, I said, pulling my hand away in disgust. Have some dignity, man. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his face, but he couldn't stop shaking. I will give you one chance, I said. One chance to stay out of prison. Anything, he sobbed. Anything. First, you resign as CEO immediately, I said. I am appointing an interim director to liquidate the assets and salvage what is left of the technology. You are out. No severance, no golden parachute. You walk away with nothing. Okay, he nodded frantically. Okay, I resign. Second, I continued, you are going to repay every cent you stole. The bags, the trips, the cars, you sell it all. If you are short, you work it off. I don't care if you have to dig ditches for the rest of your life. You pay me back. Yes, I will. I promise. And third, I said, leaning in close so he could see the fire in my eyes. You are going to go home to your wife and her parasite parents, and you are going to tell them exactly who I am. You are going to tell them that the man they mocked owns the air they breathe, and then you are going to pack your bags and get out of my house. Terrence froze. Leave Courtney. I didn't say leave your wife, I said. I said get out of my house. You can take her with you if you want. But she doesn't live in my villa anymore, and neither do you. You are evicted, Terrence. Tonight, find a motel, find a bridge, I don't care. But if you are still on my property at sunset, I will have the sheriff remove you." He looked at me, and for the first time he understood the true scope of his failure. He was losing his company, his home, his status, and likely his marriage. He was losing everything he thought defined him. "Dad, where am I supposed to go?" I sat back down in my chair and picked up a pen. "That sounds like a problem for a self-made man," I said. "Now get out of my office. You have a lot of packing to do." Terrence turned and walked toward the door. He moved like an old man, his shoulders slumped, his spirit broken. He paused at the doorway, hand on the knob. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered. I didn't look up. "Rent is due." "Terrence," I said. He closed the door. I sat alone in the silence of my empire, listening to the hum of the servers and the beating of my own heart. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. But the rot was deep, and it had to be cut out. I picked up the phone and dialed Sophia. "It is done," I said. "Prepare the liquidation papers." And Sophia, "Yes, Winston. Send a crew to the villa tonight. I want the locks changed, and put everything they leave behind on the curb. All of it." I hung up and turned my chair to face the window. Below me, the city of Atlanta bustled on, unaware that a dynasty had just fallen. I watched the cars moving like ants on the highway. I was alone, but I was clean. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend to be anyone other than who I was. Winston Carter, the Omega. And I was just getting started. I sat in my penthouse living room watching the sun dip below the Atlanta skyline. My phone sat on the glass table silent for the first time in hours. I knew the silence was temporary. It was the receding water before a tsunami. Terrence had gone back to his wife. He had told her that the well was dry, that the money was gone, and that his father was the one holding the plug. I knew Courtney. I knew how her mind worked. She was a creature of denial and entitlement. She would not accept that she had been defeated by a mechanic. She would not accept that her lifestyle was over. She would rewrite reality to fit her needs. In her mind, there was only one explanation for what had happened today. I was not a secret billionaire. I was not a genius investor. I was a senile old man suffering from delusions of grandeur. She would convince herself that I had somehow accessed Terrence's accounts, that I was sabotaging his company with my madness, that I was a danger to myself, and more importantly, a danger to her financial future. She would not see a man taking back his dignity. She would see a mental patient squandering her inheritance. I took a sip of my sparkling water. I knew what was coming. I had anticipated this move 5 years ago when I first saw how she looked at my checkbook. I had prepared for it. The intercom buzzed. It was the concierge from the lobby downstairs. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I have the police here, and a social worker from Adult Protective Services. They say they have an emergency warrant to check on your welfare. A woman named Courtney Whitman is with them. She claims you are having a psychotic break and threatening violence." I smiled. It was right on schedule. She had escalated faster than I expected, but the play was textbook. "Send them up," I said calmly. I stood up and walked to the wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Chicago skyline. I spun the dial and opened the heavy steel door. I did not take out a weapon. I took out a thin blue folder. Inside was a document I updated every 6 months without fail. It was my shield. I placed the folder on the coffee table next to my water glass. I sat back down and waited. A few minutes later, there was a heavy pounding on my front door. "Police, open up." I walked to the door and opened it. 2 uniformed officers stood there, hands resting on their belts, ready for a struggle. Behind them was a woman in a beige cardigan clutching a clipboard, looking nervous. And behind her was Courtney. She looked like a wreck. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was a manic energy vibrating off her. When she saw me, she let out a theatrical gasp and pointed a shaking finger at my face. "There he is," she screamed at the officers. "Grab him before he hurts himself. He is delusional. He thinks he owns the city. He stole my husband's money and he is burning it all down. Look at him. He is wearing a suit he probably stole." The officers stepped into the apartment, scanning the room for threats. They saw the luxury furniture, the panoramic view, the quiet order of my sanctuary. They looked confused. They were expecting a hoarder's nest or a scene of destruction, not a pristine penthouse. "Sir," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "I am Officer Miller. We received a distress call regarding your mental state. This young lady claims you are suffering from dementia and have become a danger to your family's financial security. I stepped back, allowing them to enter. I kept my hands visible and my voice low. "Good evening, officer," I said. "As you can see, I am perfectly fine. I am having a glass of water and watching the sunset. Is that a crime in Atlanta now?" Courtney pushed past the social worker, storming into my living room. "Don't listen to him," she shrieked. "He is a master manipulator. That is part of the disease. He thinks he is a tycoon. He shut off the power to our house because he thinks he is the landlord. He canceled my husband's credit cards. He is ruining us, officer. You have to take him into custody. We need an emergency guardianship order. He is spending millions that do not belong to him." The social worker stepped forward tentatively. "Mr. Carter, I am Brenda from APS. We have reports that you may be mishandling your assets due to cognitive decline. We just want to make sure you are safe and able to care for yourself." I looked at Brenda. She seemed like a decent woman doing a hard job. She had been weaponized by a predator. "I appreciate your concern, Brenda," I said, "but I assure you my cognitive faculties are intact. This is not a medical emergency. This is a retaliation." "Retaliation?" Courtney laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "For what?" "For loving you. For trying to take care of you. You are sick, Winston. You need help. Officer, look at this place. How could a retired mechanic afford this? He clearly stole the money from his son's company. He is embezzling from Terrence in his confusion. You have to arrest him." The officers looked around again. The penthouse was undeniably expensive. It did not fit the profile of the man Courtney was describing, but it also did not fit the profile of a retired mechanic. Doubt was creeping into their eyes. Sir Officer Miller asked, "Do you reside here?" "I own this building, officer," I said, "and I occupy the penthouse." Courtney threw her hands up. See? He thinks he owns the building. He is hallucinating. Next he will say he owns the police department. Take him away." Officer Miller looked at me sternly. "Do you have proof of residence, sir, or proof of ownership?" I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the blue folder. Courtney watched me like a hawk, expecting me to pull out a gun or a pile of Monopoly money. "Inside this folder," I said, handing it to the officer, "are 3 things. First is the deed to this building held by Carter Holdings, of which I am the sole proprietor. Second is my tax return from last year showing a personal income that justifies my lifestyle. And third, and most importantly, is a certificate of mental health signed and dated yesterday morning by Dr. Eris Thorne, the leading neurologist in the state." The officer opened the folder. He looked at the deed. He looked at the tax return. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. Then he looked at the medical certificate. Courtney froze. "Yesterday," she whispered. "Why would you have a certificate from yesterday?" "Because I know you, Courtney," I said, looking at her cold and hard. "I knew the moment I cut off the money you would try to declare me incompetent. I knew you would try to steal control of my assets by claiming I was crazy. So I prepared. I had a full evaluation done just in case you decided to play this card." Officer Miller handed the folder to the social worker. She read the certificate, adjusting her glasses. "This is valid," she said, looking at Courtney with a sudden sharpness. "It states clearly that Mr. Carter is of sound mind, possesses above-average cognitive function for his age, and is fully capable of managing his own affairs. It specifically notes that he expressed concern about family members attempting to exploit him financially." Courtney's face turned pale. "That doctor is a liar," she stammered. "He paid him off. It is part of the conspiracy. He is sick, I tell you." Officer Miller turned to Courtney. His demeanor had changed completely. He was no longer looking at a concerned daughter-in-law. He was looking at a nuisance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice heavy with warning, "filing a false report with Adult Protective Services is a serious offense. Wasting police resources on a civil dispute is also a crime. This man is clearly lucid. He is in his own home, and he has documentation proving his status. But he cut off our power." Courtney wailed, desperate now, clinging to her narrative like a life raft. "He evicted us. He is destroying my life." I stepped forward. "I evicted you because you violated your lease," I said. "I cut off the money because you stole from me. That is not dementia, Courtney. That is consequences." Officer Miller handed the folder back to me. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the intrusion. It appears we were given false information. You were used." "Officer," I said. She hoped you would drag me out of here in handcuffs so she could raid my safe. She hoped you would do her dirty work. Courtney backed away, shaking her head. No, no, you are all crazy. He is tricking you, ma'am, Officer Miller said, stepping toward her. You need to leave. Now. If you call us again without evidence of a crime, I will arrest you for filing a false report. Do you understand? Courtney looked at the officer, then at me. The realization was finally sinking in. The game was rigged, and I held all the aces. She had tried to drop a nuclear bomb on my life, and it had turned out to be a dud. This is not over, she hissed at me, venom dripping from every word. I will get a lawyer. I will take half of everything. I will tell the world what you did to a pregnant woman. Pregnant? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She placed a hand on her stomach, smiling cruelly. That is right, Winston. I am pregnant. With your grandchild. And if you ever want to see this baby, you will give me what I want. You will sign over the trust. You will restore the credit cards, or this child will grow up thinking his grandfather died years ago. The room went silent. The social worker looked uncomfortable. The officers looked at the floor. It was a low blow. The lowest she could have thrown. I looked at her stomach. I looked at her eyes. I saw the calculation there. I saw the leverage. I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space. If you are pregnant, Courtney, I said, my voice a low rumble, then I pity that child. To have a mother who would use them as a bargaining chip before they are even born is a tragedy. But let me be clear. I do not negotiate with terrorists, and I do not pay ransom. I turned to the officer. Officer, get her out of my house. Courtney gasped as the officer took her arm. Don't touch me, she screamed. I am pregnant. Walk, ma'am, the officer said, guiding her forcibly toward the door. Or you ride in the back. She struggled for a moment, then went limp, allowing him to escort her out. She looked back at me one last time, her eyes burning with a promise of vengeance. You will die alone, she screamed from the hallway. You will die alone in this big, empty box. The door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The social worker, Brenda, lingered for a moment. I am sorry, Mr. Carter, she said quietly. We have to investigate every call. I know, Brenda, I said. You did your job. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a business to run. She nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. I was alone again. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a cold ache in my bones. Pregnant. Was she lying? It was possible. With Courtney, anything was possible. But if she was telling the truth, the stakes had just changed. She wasn't just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting for custody of the future. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I saw the police cruiser lights flashing. I saw Courtney standing on the sidewalk arguing with the officer. She looked small from up here. But even a small rat can carry a plague. I picked up my phone and dialed Sophia. She tried the insanity plea, I said. Did it work? Sophia asked, instantly alert. No. The paperwork held up. But she played a new card. She says she is pregnant. There was a pause on the line. That complicates things, Sophia said. If there is an heir, she can petition for support. She can drag this out in family court for years. I know, I said. That is why we need to move to the next phase. What is the next phase? Sophia asked. Total scorched earth, I said. She wants to use the child as a shield. I'm going to make sure she doesn't have a battlefield to stand on. I want you to audit Richard Whitman. I want you to buy the debt on his house. I want you to find every skeleton in their closet, Winston, Sophia warned. That is aggressive. They came into my home, Sophia, I said, looking at the empty spot where Courtney had stood. They tried to lock me away. They tried to steal my mind. Aggression is the only language they speak. Understood, Sophia said. I will start the acquisitions in the morning. I hung up. I looked at the sunset again. It was blood red, streaking across the sky. A storm was coming, and I was the thunder. 3 days after the failed ambush at my penthouse, my phone rang. It was Terrence. His voice was different this time. Gone was the panic and the anger. In its place was a smooth, rehearsed tone that sounded like he was reading from a script. He invited me to dinner at Richard and Susan's house. He called it a peace summit. He said that with a baby on the way, we needed to put aside our differences and focus on the future of the family. He said his mother-in-law had spent all day cooking a roast. He sounded almost convincing. If I did not know that he was drowning in debt and facing potential jail time, I might have believed him. But I knew better. This was not a peace summit. It was a hostage negotiation. And the hostage was my unborn grandchild. I accepted the invitation. I told him I would be there at 7 o'clock. I hung up the phone and immediately called Sophia. I told her the time and the location. She told me everything was ready. The paperwork had been finalized that morning. The ink was dry. I put on my suit, the one I wore to board meetings when I was about to acquire a rival company. I did not bring a bottle of wine. I brought something much heavier. When I pulled up to Richard's colonial-style mansion in Buckhead, the lights were on and the driveway was swept. It looked like the picture of domestic stability. But I knew the truth. I knew about the second mortgage Richard had taken out 3 years ago to pay for his country club dues. I knew about the missed payments over the last 6 months while he was trying to float his failing construction business. I knew that this house was a house of cards waiting for a breeze. And I was the hurricane. Susan opened the door wearing an apron over her designer dress, trying to look like a humble grandmother. "Winston," she said, flashing a tight smile. "Thank you for coming. We are just so glad we could all sit down together." I walked past her into the foyer. The house smelled of lavender and desperation. They led me into the formal dining room. The table was set with their best china. Richard sat at the head of the table looking like a king whose castle was under siege. Courtney sat next to him, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Terrence sat opposite her looking at the tablecloth. They had left the seat at the foot of the table for me, the position of a subordinate. I sat down without a word. The dinner was an exercise in tension. We ate roast beef and potatoes while Susan chattered nervously about the weather and the baby nursery. They were trying to lull me into a sense of normalcy. They were trying to remind me of the biological bond that tied us together. They poured wine, they smiled, they played happy family. I ate quietly watching them. I watched Richard checking his watch. I watched Courtney side-eyeing her father. They were waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. It happened after the main course was cleared. Richard cleared his throat and placed his hands on the table. He looked at me with a gravity that was almost comical given what I knew. "Winston," he began, his voice deep and serious. "We have been doing a lot of thinking. The last few days have been difficult for everyone. Emotions ran high. Mistakes were made on both sides." I raised an eyebrow. "On both sides?" "Yes," Richard continued, breezing past my skepticism. "But now there is a child involved, a Carter heir. And we all agree that this child deserves the best start in life. We know you have significant resources, Winston, and we know you want to be a part of your grandchild's life." He paused for effect. Courtney looked at me, her eyes wide and wet, playing the vulnerable mother to perfection. "We want you to be a grandfather, Winston," she said softly. "We want you to teach him to fish. We want you to come to birthday parties. But we also need security. We need to know that our child will be provided for." Richard reached under the table and pulled out a leather portfolio. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. "This is a trust agreement," Richard said. "It establishes an irrevocable fund for the baby's education and future. It is a standard document, Winston. It ensures that the child's financial future is secure regardless of what happens to us." I opened the folder. I read the first page. It was standard legal jargon until I got to the section on trustees. The fund was to be capitalized with an initial deposit of $5 million from me. But the trustees, the people with sole discretion over how the money was spent and invested, were Richard Whitman and Courtney Carter. I was the donor. They were the managers. I read further. There was a clause about visitation. The grantor, that was me, would be granted reasonable visitation rights, subject to the approval of the guardians and the trustees. I closed the folder and looked up. The room was silent. They were all watching me, holding their breath. They thought they had me. They thought they had found my weakness. They thought I would sign away a fortune just for the promise of seeing a baby that hadn't been born yet. "So let me understand this," I said, tapping the leather cover. "You want me to give you $5 million. You want to control how it is spent, and in exchange you will allow me to visit my grandchild if you feel like it." "It is for the baby, Dad," Terrence said, speaking up for the first time. "It is a show of good faith. It proves you care about the family more than your money." Richard leaned back, looking confident. "It is a fair deal, Winston. You get access. We get security. Everyone wins. And if you sign tonight, we can put all this ugliness behind us. We can be a family again." I looked at Courtney. She was rubbing her belly, staring at me with a look of expectancy. She wasn't seeing a grandfather. She was seeing a payday. She was seeing a way to pay off her debts and keep her lifestyle without having to work for it. They were selling tickets to my own bloodline. I started to laugh. It started as a chuckle deep in my chest and grew into a full belly laugh. It was a loud, jarring sound in the quiet dining room. Richard frowned. "What is so funny?" "You are," I said, wiping a tear from my eye. "You are hilarious, Richard. You sit there in your rented suit at your table eating roast beef you probably put on a credit card and you try to hustle me. You try to hustle the hustle." "This is serious, Winston," Richard snapped, losing his composure. "This is about the child. If you do not sign this, you will never see this baby. Do you understand? We will get a restraining order. We will tell the child you abandoned him. You will be a ghost." I stopped laughing. The room went cold. "No, Richard," I said. "I won't be a ghost, but you might be homeless." Just then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound. Susan looked confused. Who could that be at this hour? I checked my watch. Right on time. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. "I will get it," Terrence said, standing up. "Sit down, Terrence," I commanded. "I will get it. It is for me anyway." I stood up and walked to the front door. Richard and the others followed me, confused and angry. I opened the door. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the porch light, was Sophia Morales. Behind her stood Sheriff Davis, a man I had known for 20 years. He looked uncomfortable, but determined. Sophia stepped forward, holding a thick envelope. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." "Good evening, Sophia," I said. "Please come in. Sheriff, you too." We walked back into the foyer. Richard turned pale when he saw the uniform. "What is going on here?" Richard demanded, his voice shaking. "Why is the sheriff in my house?" Sheriff Davis took off his hat. "Mr. Whitman, I am sorry to disturb your dinner, but I am here to serve an eviction notice." "Eviction," Richard sputtered. "That is insane. I own this house. I have lived here for 20 years. Actually," Sophia said, stepping forward, "you don't. Not anymore. Your mortgage was held by First National Bank. You have missed your last 6 payments, Richard. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 3 months ago. You ignored the notices." "I am refinancing," Richard shouted, sweat pouring down his face. "I have a deal in the works. They cannot foreclose." "They already did," Sophia said calmly. "The auction was held this morning at the county courthouse at 9 a.m. The property was sold to the highest bidder." "Who?" Richard whispered. "Who bought it?" Sophia pointed at me. "Carter Holdings, LLC. Mr. Winston Carter bought the debt, Richard. He paid cash. He owns the deed. He owns the house." Courtney gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "No, that is impossible." "It is done," Sophia said, handing Richard the envelope. "This is the notice to vacate. Under Georgia law, since the new owner intends to occupy the property for renovation, you have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings and vacate the premises." 24 hours, Susan shrieked. "But where will we go?" I stepped forward. "That sounds like a problem for the trustees," I said, looking at Richard. "You wanted a deal, Richard. Here is the deal. I am not giving you $5 million. I am not signing your trust, and I am not negotiating for the right to see my own flesh and blood." I looked at Courtney. "You wanted to use my grandchild as leverage. You wanted to play games with family. Well, game over. You are standing in my foyer. You are eating my food, and you are breathing my air." Richard lunged at me. He lost it. The facade of the gentleman crumbled, and the desperate broke man underneath clawed his way out. He swung a fist at my face, screaming obscenities. "You stole my house," he roared. "You thief!" I did not flinch. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. I stepped to the side, caught his wrist, and twisted it behind his back, pushing him face first into the wall. It was effortless. He was soft. He was weak. "Sheriff," I said calmly, holding Richard against the floral wallpaper, "I would like to press charges for assault, and I want this man removed from my property immediately. He is trespassing." Sheriff Davis stepped in, pulling Richard off the wall and snapping handcuffs on his wrists. "Richard Whitman, you are under arrest for assault and criminal trespass," the sheriff said, reciting the rights I knew by heart. Dad Courtney screamed, running toward him. "Stop it! Let him go! Winston, tell him to stop!" I adjusted my cuffs. "I cannot do that, Courtney. I am just an observer, remember? I just watch." They dragged Richard out the front door, kicking and screaming. Susan collapsed onto the stairs, sobbing. Terrence stood in the hallway, frozen, unable to process the speed at which his world had just disintegrated. I turned to Sophia. Change the locks tomorrow at noon, I said. Whatever is left inside goes to the dump. I walked past Courtney, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and awe. You have 24 hours, I said. I suggest you start packing. The nursery furniture is heavy. I walked out of the house and into the night. Behind me, the sound of Susan's wailing faded into the distance. I got into my car and drove away. I did not feel happy. I felt heavy, but I also felt clean. I had burned the infection out. Now I just had to wait for the smoke to clear. The air in the foyer was thick with the smell of roasted beef, expensive wine, and the acrid scent of male desperation. Richard Whitman was not a fighter. He was a man who fought his battles with lawyers and backroom deals and checkbooks. But he had no lawyers left. He had no deals, and his checkbook was as empty as his soul. So when the reality of his eviction hit him, when the sheriff's handcuffs clicked around one of his wrists, something inside him snapped. It was a primal break, the sound of a cornered animal realizing there is no escape route. He let out a roar that was half scream and half sob. With a strength born of pure panic, he twisted his body violently. Sheriff Davis was a big man, but he had been expecting a white-collar arrest, not a barroom brawl. Richard's elbow connected with the sheriff's ribs, knocking the officer back a step. The handcuffs dangled from one wrist, a heavy steel weapon swinging in the air. Richard did not run for the door. He did not run for his wife. He turned his eyes on me. In his twisted mind, I was the source of all this pain. I was the reason he was humiliated. I was the reason he was broke. He forgot about the loans he didn't pay. He forgot about the lies he told. He just saw a 70-year-old black man in a suit standing in his hallway, and he decided he wanted blood. "I am going to kill you!" Richard screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You ruined my life!" He lunged at me. It was a clumsy attack. He swung his free arm in a wild haymaker, aiming for my head. His face was purple, his eyes bulging. To anyone else, he might have looked terrifying. To me, he looked slow. Time did not slow down. That is a myth people tell in movies. Time moved at the exact same speed, but my processing got faster. It is what the Marine Corps drills into you until it is part of your DNA. Evaluate, adapt, overcome. I was 70 years old, but I kept fit. I lifted weights 4 times a week, and muscle memory does not age. I did not step back. Stepping back gives the attacker momentum. I stepped forward. I stepped into his space, cutting off his arc. As his fist came down, I brought my left forearm up hard, blocking his strike at the bicep. The impact jarred my bone, but I barely felt it. At the same time, I drove my right hand into his chest palm open, hitting him square in the sternum. It was not a lethal blow. It was a stopping blow. Richard gasped as the air was forced out of his lungs. He stumbled back, his momentum reversed, but he was frantic now, flailing with the hand that held the loose cuff. The steel shackle swung toward my face. I caught his wrist. I gripped it tight, feeling the pulse hammering under his skin. I twisted his arm behind his back, leveraging his own weight against him. He cried out in pain as his shoulder joint hit its limit. I swept his leg with my foot and drove him face first into the floral wallpaper of the foyer. I held him there. My hand was pinned against his back, pressing him into the wall. He was struggling, kicking his legs, trying to bite, but he was pinned. I leaned in close to his ear. "You are done, Richard," I said, my voice low and steady. "Stop moving or I will break your arm." He stopped moving. He slumped against the wall, wheezing, defeated. Behind me, chaos had erupted. Susan was screaming a high-pitched wail that pierced the ears. But it was Courtney's voice that cut through the noise. "Get off him!" she shrieked, running toward us. "You are hurting him! Get your hands off my father, you animal!" She grabbed at my suit jacket, clawing at the fabric. Her nails dug into my shoulder. "Sheriff, help him!" she yelled. "This old black man is attacking my father. He is crazy. He is violent. Shoot him." Sheriff Davis had recovered his balance. He stepped forward, his face grim. He pulled Courtney off me none too gently. "Back off, Courtney." The sheriff barked. She spun on him. "Did you see that? He assaulted my father. He threw him against the wall. Arrest him. You have to arrest him." I released Richard, slowly stepping back and smoothing the front of my jacket. Richard slid down the wall to the floor, clutching his shoulder, panting like a dog. Sheriff Davis ignored Courtney. He reached down and grabbed Richard's other hand, snapping the second cuff into place. He checked the tightness efficiently. "Richard Whitman, you are under arrest for assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and attempted assault on Mr. Carter," the sheriff said. "Attempted assault." Courtney screamed, hysterical now. My dad was defending his home. Winston provoked him. Winston attacked him. Look at him standing there. He is enjoying this. I looked at her. She was right about one thing. I was standing there calm and collected while her world burned. I adjusted my silk tie, centering the knot. I brushed a speck of dust off my lapel. I did not attack him, Courtney, I said, my voice filling the foyer, silencing her screams. I neutralized a threat. Your father attempted to cause me bodily harm on my property. I used necessary force to restrain him until law enforcement could secure the situation. Your property, she spat. You stole it. I bought it, I corrected. And as the property owner, I have a right to protect my assets from illegal intruders who become violent. Your father is no longer a guest. He is a criminal trespasser who just committed a felony. Richard looked up from the floor. He looked broken. The fight had left him. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer angry, just empty and scared. Winston, he croaked, his voice raspy. Please, do not do this. I have a heart condition. You should have thought about that before you tried to punch me, I said. Sheriff Davis hauled Richard to his feet. Let's go, Richard. You can tell the judge about your heart condition in the morning. Susan threw herself at her husband, clutching his jacket. No, you cannot take him. Where are you taking him? County jail, Susan, the sheriff said. And I suggest you step back unless you want to join him for obstruction of justice. Susan recoiled, covering her mouth with her hands. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. Winston, please. We are family. You cannot let them take him to jail. Think of the scandal. Think of the baby. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had laughed when I was given a plastic badge. I looked at the woman who had treated me like a servant for 5 years. The baby is safe, Susan, I said. The baby is not the one going to jail. And as for the scandal, you should have thought about that before you stopped paying your mortgage. Sheriff Davis began to march Richard toward the door. Richard was stumbling, his head hung low, his expensive shoes scuffing on the hardwood floor he no longer owned. Wait, Courtney cried, chasing after them. Dad, do not worry. I will call a lawyer. I will get you out. Richard did not look back. He knew the truth. There was no money for a lawyer. There was no bail fund. He was going into the system, and he was going in broke. The front door opened, and the cold night air rushed in. The sheriff pushed Richard out onto the porch and down the steps toward the waiting cruiser. The blue lights flashed rhythmically, illuminating the manicured lawn of the house that had been their pride and joy. Courtney stood in the open doorway, watching them go. She turned back to me. Her face was a mask of hatred. I will never forgive you for this, she whispered. You are a monster. I walked over to the door. I placed my hand on the heavy wood. You have 24 hours, Courtney, I said. But honestly, I would leave tonight if I were you. It is going to be awkward when the locksmiths arrive in the morning. She stared at me for a second longer, then turned and ran down the steps toward her mother, who was weeping by her car. I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the loudest sound I had heard all night. I turned back to the foyer. It was empty except for one person, Terrence. He was still standing by the dining room entrance. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He had watched his father-in-law attack his father. He had watched the sheriff handcuff Richard. He had watched his wife scream and cry, and he had done absolutely nothing. He stood there in his suit looking like a statue of cowardice. His hands were hanging limp at his sides. His eyes were wide and vacant. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if he had never seen me before in his life. I walked toward him. My footsteps echoed on the floor. I stopped a few feet away. I could smell the fear on him. Terrence, I said. He flinched. Dad. I waited. I waited for him to say something. Anything. I waited for him to ask if I was okay. I waited for him to apologize for Richard. I waited for him to show some spine, some shred of the man I tried to raise. But he just stared at me. Are you going to kick me out too? He asked, his voice trembling. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had loved, the son I had protected, the son I had built a company for, and I realized that the boy I knew was gone. He had been replaced by this hollow shell of a man who cared more about his comfort than his character. I am not kicking you out, Terrence, I said. I am evicting the Whitmans. You are welcome to stay here with them until the deadline. But after that, the house is mine. Where will we go? He asked. I do not know, I said. That is a question for the head of the household. Are you the head of your household, Terrence? He looked down. He couldn't answer. I walked past him into the dining room. The table was still set. The roast beef was cold on the platter. The wine glasses were half full. It looked like a scene from the Titanic moments after the iceberg hit. I picked up the leather folder Richard had tried to make me sign. The trust agreement, the one that would have given them control of my money. I walked back to the foyer. Terrence was still standing there. I held up the folder. "You knew about this?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes. You knew they were going to leverage the baby." "You knew they were going to try to take my money." "Yes," he whispered. "And you were going to let them." He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't have a choice, Dad. They are my family. I have to live with them." I nodded. I understood. He had made his choice long ago. He had chosen the path of least resistance. He had chosen to be a passenger in his own life. "Well," I said, tucking the folder under my arm, "now you have to live with the consequences." I walked to the front door and opened it again. "Go to your wife, Terrence," I said. "She needs you, and you are going to need each other, because nobody else is going to help you now." He looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a profound sadness. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. "Goodbye, son," I replied. He walked out the door and down the steps. I watched him get into his car. I watched him drive away, following the police cruiser and his weeping mother-in-law. I stood alone in the house I had bought, the house I had paid for. It was quiet. It was empty. It was mine. I locked the door. I set the alarm. I walked to my car. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I had taken back my dignity. I had protected my legacy. But as I drove away into the night, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence I left behind. It was the silence of a victory that felt a lot like a funeral. But I was alive. And I was still standing. And tomorrow was rent day. I sat on a rusted metal bench in Centennial Park watching the gray clouds roll over the Atlanta skyline. This was the park where I taught Terrence how to throw a baseball 30 years ago. It was a place of cracked pavement and overgrown grass far away from the manicured lawns of the country club. I chose it for a reason. I wanted him to remember where we came from before the money, before the suits, before the lies. I checked my watch. He was late. But I knew he would come. He had nowhere else to go. His credit was frozen, his friends had abandoned him, and his in-laws were currently imploding in a cheap motel room. I saw him walking up the path. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same suit he had worn to the dinner 2 days ago, but now it was wrinkled and stained. His tie was gone. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He hadn't shaved. He walked with a heavy, dragging step, the walk of a man carrying the weight of the world on his back. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a refugee. He stopped in front of the bench. He didn't sit down. He just stood there looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. He looked like he was waiting for me to yell at him or hit him. But I was done yelling. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. "Hello, Dad," he croaked. His voice was hoarse, probably from screaming matches with Courtney. "Hello, son," I said. "Sit down." He hesitated, then sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a foot of space between us. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and bearing his face in his hands. "I ruined everything," he whispered through his fingers. Courtney left. She went to stay with a friend. Her parents are blaming me for the eviction. They say I tricked them. They say I knew you were rich and I hid it to humiliate them. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them the truth," Terrence said, looking up. "I told them I was an idiot. I told them I was blind." I nodded, looking out at the playground where children were chasing each other. "I have a question for you, Terrence," I said, "and I want an honest answer. Not a CEO answer. Not a husband answer. A man's answer." He looked at me warily. "What is it?" "New Year's Eve," I said. "The dinner. When Courtney handed me that badge, when she told me to sit on a stool in the corner, you didn't say anything. You let it happen. But what I want to know is why. Why was there no chair for me, Terrence? There were 20 seats at that table. You could have squeezed one more in. You could have brought a chair from the kitchen. Why didn't you?" Terrence looked away. He stared at a pigeon pecking at a discarded crust of bread. He swallowed hard. "Courtney said it would ruin the aesthetic," he whispered. I felt a fresh wave of pain, but I kept my face impassive. The aesthetic. She wanted the table to be symmetrical. He continued, his voice trembling. "She hired a photographer for Instagram. She said having an odd number of chairs would throw off the shot. She said you wouldn't fit the theme. She said you looked too what I pressed. Too working class." He finished, the shame evident in his voice. "She said you looked like the help, and she didn't want the help in her pictures." I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. My own son had banished me to a stool because I didn't match the table setting, because my hands looked like they had worked for a living. It was the most pathetic reason I had ever heard, and it confirmed everything I needed to know. "And you agreed with her," I said. "I didn't want to fight her," Terrence said, pleading now. "She gets so angry, Dad. You don't know what she is like. She screams. She breaks things. It was easier to just go along with it. I thought you wouldn't mind. I thought you were used to being in the background." I stood up. The metal bench groaned. "I spent my life in the background so you could stand in the spotlight, Terrence," I said, looking down at him. "I worked double shifts. I skipped meals. I wore the same boots for 10 years so you could have braces and college tuition. And you repaid me by treating me like a prop in your wife's photo shoot." "I know, Dad. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Please help me. I have nothing. I have no money. I have no place to sleep. I am hungry." He looked up at me, expecting the wallet to open. He expected the father who had always bailed him out to do it one more time. He thought an apology was a currency that could buy him a hotel room. I reached into my jacket pocket. Terrence's eyes lit up. He thought I was reaching for my checkbook. He thought I was going to write him a check that would make the nightmare go away. I pulled out a plain white envelope. It was thin. "I am going to help you, Terrence," I said. "But not the way you think." I handed him the envelope. He took it, his hands shaking. He tore it open. He pulled out the contents. It wasn't a check. It was a single piece of paper printed from an airline website and a handwritten index card. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "It is a plane ticket," I said. "One way. Spirit Airlines. No carry-on. Leaving tonight at 11 p.m. from Hartsfield, Jackson." "Where does it go?" he asked, staring at the destination code. "Midland, Texas," I said. "Texas. Why Texas?" I pointed to the index card. "Read the card." He read it out loud. "Miller Construction Site B. Foreman Mike Kowalski. Report for duty. Monday morning, 6 a.m. Bring boots." "What is this?" he asked again, looking up at me with panic rising in his eyes. "It is a job, Terrence," I said. "Mike Kowalski is an old friend of mine. I served with him in the Corps. He runs a crew laying pipeline in the West Texas oil fields. It is hard work. It is dirty work. It is hot work." "You want me to lay pipe?" he exclaimed. "Dad, I am a tech CEO. I have a degree in computer science. I can't dig ditches." "You are not a CEO," I corrected him. "You are an unemployed embezzler, and right now you are not qualified to run a lemonade stand, let alone a company. You lost the right to white-collar work when you stole $2 million from me." "I can't go to Texas," he said, dropping the envelope on the bench. "I have to fix things with Courtney. I have to find a lawyer." "You don't have money for a lawyer," I said. "And as for Courtney, she is gone, Terrence. She is looking for her next host. She drained you dry, and now she is moving on. If you stay here chasing her, you will end up in prison or on the street." "But $15 an hour," he said, looking at the card again. "That is minimum wage. How am I supposed to live on that?" "You will live in the crew bunkhouse," I said. "Room and board is deducted from your paycheck. You will eat what they feed you. You will sleep when they let you. And you will save every penny you make to pay me back." "This is punishment," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "You are punishing me." "No, son," I said. "This is education. You skipped the most important grade. You went straight to the penthouse without ever learning how to build the foundation. You don't know the value of $1 because you never sweated for one. You think money is magic. You think it just appears when you swipe a card. I am giving you the chance to learn what money actually is. It is time. It is blood. It is life." I stepped closer to him. "Here is the deal, Terrence. You get on that plane tonight. You go to Texas. You work for Mike for 1 year. You don't call me. You don't ask for money. You keep your head down and you work. If you stick it out, if you prove to me that you can be a man who stands on his own 2 feet, then maybe we can talk about a future. Maybe. And if I don't," he whispered, "then you are on your own," I said. "I will proceed with the criminal charges for embezzlement. I will testify against you, and I will watch you go to prison." He stared at me horrified. "You would send your own son to jail. I would send a thief to jail," I said. "The choice is yours. You can be my son the worker, or you can be Terrence the inmate, or you can stay here in Atlanta and drown with the Whitmans. They are going down, Terrence. Richard is facing felony assault charges. Courtney is facing fraud investigations. If you stay with them, they will drag you to the bottom of the ocean. Terrence looked at the ticket in his hand. He looked at the index card. He looked at the skyline of the city where he had played the big shot for 3 years. He was trembling. He was terrified. He had never been alone in his life. He had always had me or Courtney or a credit card to protect him. Now he was naked. "But Courtney is pregnant," he said, a last desperate attempt. "She says it is your grandchild." "If she is pregnant," I said, "and that is a big if, the child will be better off with a father who knows how to work than a father who is in prison. Go to Texas, Terrence. Become a man your child can respect, because right now you are just a joke." He looked down at the ground. He started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook his shoulders. He cried for the loss of his easy life. He cried for the loss of his delusions. He cried because he knew I was right. He sat there for a long time crying. I didn't comfort him. I didn't pat his back. I let him feel it. I let the reality of his situation sink into his bones. Finally, he wiped his face with his dirty sleeve. He sniffed. He picked up the envelope and the index card. He put them in his pocket. "How do I get to the airport?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "There is a MARTA station 3 blocks from here," I said. "It costs $2.50. "Do you have $2.50, Terrence?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of change. He counted it. He nodded. "Yes," he said. "Then you better get moving," I said. "You don't want to miss your flight." He stood up. He looked at me. For a moment I thought he was going to hug me. I thought he was going to beg one last time, but he saw the look in my eyes. He saw the stone wall. He nodded slowly. He understood. This was it. The safety net was gone. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. "Goodbye, Terrence," I said. "Work hard." He turned and walked away. He walked down the path toward the subway station. He looked small. He looked defeated. But he was walking. He was moving. He was leaving the toxicity behind. He was choosing the hard road. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner. My heart was breaking. Every instinct as a father screamed at me to run after him, to give him a hug, to give him cash, to tell him it would be okay. But I knew that would be the worst thing I could do. I had loved him too much, and that love had crippled him. Now I had to love him enough to let him suffer. I sat back down on the bench. I looked at the empty spot where he had been sitting. I thought about the chair at the New Year's Eve party, the chair that wasn't there because of an aesthetic. I pulled out my phone. I sent a text to Mike Kowalski. "He is coming. Don't go easy on him." Mike replied a second later. "Copy that, Winston. We will make a man out of him, or we will break him trying." I put the phone away. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the park. I was alone. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. My son was gone. But maybe, just maybe, the man he was supposed to be was finally being born. I stood up and walked toward my truck. I had a company to run. And I had a war to finish. The Whitmans were still standing, and I still had ammunition left. The divorce papers arrived at my office 3 weeks after Terrence left for Texas. They were delivered by a courier service that cost more than my son's current hourly wage. I opened the thick envelope and scanned the demands. It was a masterclass in delusion. Courtney was not just filing for separation. She was filing for a lifestyle. She demanded spousal support in the amount of $20,000 a month. She demanded 50% of the equity in the Lakeside estate. She demanded half of the Omega Fund's valuation. She demanded ownership of the luxury vehicles. She even demanded legal fees for the foreclosure defense on her parents' house. She believed she was divorcing a tech mogul who was temporarily embarrassed by a family feud. She thought Terrence was hiding money. She thought I was holding his inheritance in an offshore account waiting for the dust to settle. She had no idea that her husband was currently covered in grease and mud, living in a single wide trailer in Midland, Texas, earning $15 an hour. She was trying to squeeze blood from a stone that I had already crushed into dust. I called Sophia. She was already aware of the filing. She hired Dalton Price. Sophia said, her voice dry. "He is the most expensive divorce attorney in Atlanta. He charges $800 an hour. She must have convinced him there is a massive pot of gold at the end of this rainbow." "Let them dig," I said. "They are going to break their shovels." The court date was set for an expedited hearing. Courtney claimed emergency financial distress due to the pregnancy. She wanted a temporary order freezing Terrence's assets. I decided to attend, not as a party to the divorce, but as an interested observer. The man with the badge. The courtroom was sterile and cold. Courtney sat at the plaintiff's table next to Dalton Price. Price was a slick man in a pinstripe suit who checked his watch every 30 seconds. Courtney looked the part of the grieving, abandoned wife. She wore a modest black dress and minimal makeup. She kept her hand on her stomach. When she saw me enter the back of the courtroom, her eyes narrowed. She whispered something to Price. He turned and looked at me, calculating the cost of my suit versus the potential settlement. Terrence was not there. He could not afford the flight back, and I had not offered to pay for it. He was represented by a court-appointed attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Price stood up to make his opening statement. He painted a picture of a cruel abandonment. He described Terrence as a wealthy executive who had cut off his pregnant wife without warning, leaving her destitute while he fled the state to hide his fortune. "Your Honor," Price boomed, his voice filling the room. "Mr. Carter is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech firm. He lives in a $5 million estate. He drives six-figure cars. Yet he has left my client with zero support. We are asking for an immediate freeze on all accounts held by Terrence Carter and the Omega Fund, and a temporary support order of $20,000 a month." The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Holloway, looked at the defense table. "Does Mr. Carter have representation regarding these assets?" she asked. Sophia stood up from the gallery. She walked through the swinging gate and approached the bench. "Your Honor, I am Sophia Morales," she said. "I represent the Winston Carter Revocable Trust and Carter Holdings, LLC. I am here to clarify the ownership of the assets in question." Price scoffed. "Objection. This is a divorce hearing. Third-party trusts are not relevant unless they are being used to shield marital assets." "They are very relevant, Mr. Price," Sophia said, calmly, placing a heavy box of files on the defense table. "Because your client is attempting to claim assets that do not belong to her husband. In fact, they never did." Judge Holloway waved her hand. "I will hear it." "Go ahead, Ms. Morales." Sophia opened the first file. She projected a deed onto the courtroom screen. "This is the deed to the Lakeside Estate," Sophia said. "As you can see, it is owned solely by Carter Holdings, LLC. Terrence Carter was a tenant. His lease was terminated for cause on January 1st. He has no equity in the property." Price frowned, scanning his own papers. "But he lived there for 5 years. He made improvements. That establishes a marital interest. He paid $1 a month in rent," Sophia countered, "and the improvements were paid for by the landlord. Here are the contractor invoices paid directly by Winston Carter. Terrence Carter contributed $0 to the equity of the home." Courtney shifted in her seat, looking nervous. Price whispered something to her, and she shook her head vigorously. "Move on to the company," Price said dismissively. "The house is one thing, but the tech company, the Omega Fund, that is intellectual property developed during the marriage. That is a marital asset." Sophia switched slides. "This is the capitalization table for the tech startup. As you can see, the Omega Fund owns 100% of the equity. Terrence Carter was an employee. He was the CEO, yes, but he held no founder shares. His compensation was salary-based." "And who owns the Omega Fund?" Price asked, sensing the trap closing. "Winston Carter," Sophia said, pointing to me in the back of the room. Price turned to look at me. His confidence was cracking. He looked back at Courtney. "You told me he was the owner," he hissed. "He acted like the owner," she whispered back, loud enough for me to hear. "He spent the money. He signed the checks." Sophia continued, relentless. "Furthermore, the startup is currently insolvent. The Omega Fund has called its loans due to embezzlement and misappropriation of funds by the CEO. Terrence Carter is currently facing civil liability for over $2 million in stolen capital. Even if he owned shares, they would be worthless." The judge looked at Price. "It appears, Mr. Price, that you are asking for half of a debt, not half of a fortune." Price wiped sweat from his forehead. "But the trust," he said, grasping at straws. "We know there is a family trust. The family has lived a lavish lifestyle. Terrence is the beneficiary. That income stream is imputable for child support." Sophia smiled. It was a shark's smile. "I am glad you brought that up," she said. She pulled a single document from the box. It was the trust agreement I had drafted 10 years ago. "This is the Winston Carter Trust," Sophia said. "It is a discretionary trust. Terrence Carter is named as a beneficiary. However, there is a specific clause regarding distribution. Clause 13. "Read it," Sophia, the judge ordered. Sophia cleared her throat. The beneficiary shall forfeit all rights to distributions, income, or corpus of the trust immediately and permanently upon any act of gross disrespect, public humiliation, or attempt to disenfranchise the grantor. The determination of such acts is at the sole discretion of the grantor. Sophia looked at Courtney. On New Year's Eve, Sophia said, her voice ringing in the silence. Terence Carter allowed his wife to place a badge labeled Observer on his father, the grantor. He allowed her to deny the grantor a seat at the dinner table. He participated in the public humiliation of the man who created the trust. I stood up. The judge looked at me. I am the grantor, I said, and I determined that the condition was met. Sophia handed the document to the judge. On January 1st at 12:01 a.m., Winston Carter executed the forfeiture clause. Terence Carter was removed as a beneficiary. He has no rights to the trust. He has no income from the trust. He has nothing. The judge read the paper. She looked at Courtney, who was now pale and trembling. She looked at Price, who was packing his briefcase. It seems pretty airtight, Mr. Price, the judge said. Your client is asking for half of zero. But the baby, Courtney wailed, standing up. What about the baby? He has to pay for the baby. The judge looked at her with pity mixed with annoyance. Mom-child support is based on income, the judge said. According to the documents provided by Ms. Morales, your husband currently earns $15 an hour as a manual laborer in Texas. The state guidelines for that income level would result in a payment of approximately $200 a month. $200? Courtney screamed. That won't even buy diapers. I need $20,000. I have expenses. I have debts. My parents lost their house. That is not the court's problem, the judge said, banging her gavel. Petition for temporary support denied. Petition for asset freeze denied, as there are no assets to freeze. The court reserves the right to assign legal fees given the frivolous nature of the financial claims. Price stood up. Your Honor, I am withdrawing as counsel. You can't withdraw, Courtney shrieked, grabbing his arm. We have a contract. My contract was based on a contingency of the settlement, Price said, pulling his arm free. There is no settlement, and you lied to me about the assets. You are on your own, Mrs. Carter. He walked out of the courtroom, leaving Courtney standing alone at the table. She looked around the room, wild-eyed. She looked at the judge, who was already calling the next case. She looked at Sophia, who was closing her files, and then she looked at me. She walked down the aisle toward me. Her hands were shaking. You planned this? She whispered. You set us up. I didn't plan for you to be greedy, Courtney, I said, standing up to leave. I didn't plan for you to be cruel. I just planned for this possibility that you might be, and you didn't disappoint. You can't leave me like this, she said, tears spilling over. I have nothing. My parents are living in a motel. I am pregnant. I looked at her stomach. If that baby is real, I said, I will make sure it is educated. I will make sure it has medical care. But the money goes to the school and the doctor. Not to you. You will never touch a dime of my money again. But how am I supposed to live? She asked. I adjusted my jacket. There is a hiring sign at the diner down the street, I said. They pay $12 an hour plus tips. It is honest work. You should try it sometime. I walked past her out of the courtroom. Behind me, I heard her sobbing. It wasn't the soft cry of a victim. It was the angry, frustrated cry of a predator who had just realized she was actually the prey. I walked out into the bright Atlanta sunlight. Sophia was waiting for me by the car. That went well, she said. It went exactly as the paperwork dictated, I said. What now, she asked. Now we handle the fallout, I said. She is not done. She has no money, no lawyer, and no husband. She only has one weapon left. Her reputation, Sophia guessed. Exactly, I said. She is going to try to burn my name down. She is going to play the race card, the age card, and the victim card all at once. Let her, Sophia said, opening the car door. We have the tapes. I nodded. We had the security footage from the house. We had the audio from the dinner. We had everything, but I didn't want to use it unless I had to. I wanted to see if she had any bottom. I wanted to see how low she would go. I got into the car. Take me to the office, Sophia, I said. I have a company to run. And keep an eye on social media. The storm isn't over. It is just changing direction. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the courthouse. Courtney was coming down the steps alone. She took her phone out of her purse. I could see her typing furiously. She was building her narrative. She was crafting her lie. She was about to declare war on the truth. And I was ready. I was sitting in my office overlooking the city when the notification came through. It was not a stock alert. It was not a shipping update. It was a link sent by Sophia with a subject line that simply read, "It has begun." I clicked the link. It opened a video on a popular social media platform. The thumbnail showed Courtney. She looked nothing like the polished socialite who had sneered at me on New Year's Eve. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt. Her hair was messy, pulled back in a loose bun. She wore no makeup, revealing the dark circles under her eyes. She was sitting on the edge of a bed in a cheap motel room, the peeling wallpaper visible in the background. She looked like a refugee from a war zone, and in a way she was. She was fighting a war against the truth. I pressed play. Courtney looked into the camera, her eyes welling with tears. She took a shuddering breath. "I did not want to do this," she began, her voice trembling. "I wanted to keep this private. I wanted to protect my family, but I have nowhere else to turn. I am pregnant, I am alone, and I am terrified." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "My husband's father, Winston Carter, is a powerful man. He owns half of Atlanta. He has billions. And he hates me. He hates me because I am white. He hates me because I am carrying his mixed-race grandchild. He told me that he would not let his bloodline be diluted. He told me that I was nothing but a vessel, and when I stood up to him, when I told him that love does not see color, he destroyed us." I watched in silence as she wove a tapestry of lies so thick it was almost suffocating. She claimed I had used racial slurs. She claimed I had physically threatened her. She claimed I had evicted them on a whim because I was a bitter, lonely man who could not stand to see them happy. "He cut off our power in the middle of winter," she sobbed. "He locked us out. He stole my husband's company. He bribed the police to arrest my father on false charges, and now he is trying to starve us out. He wants me to lose this baby. He wants to erase us. Please help me. I am fighting a monster and I do not have a sword." The video ended with a link to a crowdfunding page titled "Help Courtney Save Her Baby." I looked at the view count. 3 million views in 4 hours. The comments were scrolling so fast I could not read them. They were vicious. "Cancel Winston Carter. Boycott Carter Industrial. This man is a racist tyrant. Someone should burn his building down." My office phone began to ring. Then my cell phone, then the intercom. "Mr. Carter," my secretary's voice came through shaking. "There are reporters in the lobby. There are protesters gathering outside. They have signs. They are chanting your name." I stood up and walked to the window. Down below, a crowd was forming. I could see the news vans lining up. I could see the angry faces. Courtney had weaponized the world against me. She had played the victim card perfectly, tapping into the collective outrage of a society that loves a villain. She thought she had won. She thought the pressure would break me. She thought I would write a check just to make it stop. But she had made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed that because I was private, I was defenseless. She assumed that because I had been silent, I had nothing to say. I pressed the intercom button. "Tell security to lock the elevators," I said. "And tell the press to meet me in the atrium in 1 hour. I will be making a statement." "Are you sure, Mr. Carter?" my secretary asked. "The PR firm advises against engaging. They say we should issue a written denial and wait for it to blow over." "This will not blow over," I said. "This is a fire." "And you do not fight fire with paper. You fight it with water, a flood of it." I hung up and called Sophia. "Bring the drive," I said. "I know," she said. "I am already on my way." 1 hour later, I walked into the atrium of the Carter Industrial Building. It was a massive space glass and steel designed to impress. Today, it was filled with a hostile army. Reporters from every major network were there, microphones raised like bayonets. The flashbulbs were blinding. The noise was deafening. When they saw me, a roar went up. Questions were shouted, accusations thrown like stones. "Mr. Carter, are you a racist? Did you really tell her to lose the baby? Why did you evict a pregnant woman? Do you have any shame?" I walked to the podium. I stood there alone. I did not have a PR team. I did not have a crisis manager. I just had a remote control in my hand. I waited. I let them scream. I let them vent their fury. I looked at their faces. They were hungry for blood. They wanted to see the Titan fall. They wanted to see the monster Courtney had described. Finally, the noise died down. They wanted to hear my defense. They wanted to hear me beg. I leaned into the microphone. "I am not here to give a speech." I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I am not here to offer apologies for things I did not do. I am here to show you the truth. I pointed the remote at the massive LED screen that dominated the back wall of the atrium. It was usually used to display stock prices and shipping routes. Today, it was going to display the end of Courtney Whitman. Courtney claims I evicted her because of her race, I said. She claims I humiliated her because I am a hateful man. She claims she was a victim. I clicked the button. The screen flickered to life. The footage was high-definition, crisp, and clear. It was from the security cameras inside the lakeside estate. I had installed them 5 years ago. They recorded audio and video, and I had kept the footage from New Year's Eve. The video started. The date and timestamp were visible in the corner. December 31st, 7 p.m. The atrium went silent as the scene unfolded. On the huge screen, everyone saw the dining room. They saw the table set for 20. They saw me walk in wearing my old suit. They saw Courtney intercept me. The audio was perfect. Courtney's voice rang out clear and condescending. "You can stay, but you have to wear this." The camera zoomed in digitally, tracking the plastic badge. Observer. We saw her hand it to me. We saw her sneer. "We need the seats for people who are contributing to the legacy, people with skin in the game." The reporters watched, mesmerized. They saw Richard and Susan approach. They heard Richard's laugh. "Consider it Charity Winston. We hate to see food go to waste." They heard Susan. "Food is for family. You are just baggage." They saw Terrence standing there doing nothing. They saw me ask him for help. They heard his reply. "Dad, please. Just go sit on the stool. You are embarrassing me." The crowd in the atrium began to shift. The hostility was evaporating, replaced by confusion and then shock. They were seeing the truth. They were seeing a 70-year-old father being humiliated by the very people who were now claiming to be victims. They saw the racism, but it wasn't coming from me. It was in the way they looked at me, the way they spoke to me like I was something beneath their shoes. I let the video play. I let them see me write on the badge. I let them see me toss it on the plate. Rent is due now. I paused the video. The image on the screen froze on Courtney's face, twisted in rage as she screamed at me to get out. I looked out at the reporters. "Does that look like a woman who is being persecuted?" I asked. "Or does that look like a woman who is angry because her free ride just ended?" I clicked the remote again. A new video played. This one was from the Ring camera at the decoy house the next morning. It showed Richard banging on the door, screaming. It showed Courtney typing on her phone. Then I put up a graphic. It was a split screen. On one side was Courtney's tearful social media video claiming poverty. On the other side was a bank statement. It showed the transfers from my account to hers. $162,000 over 3 years. I highlighted the line items. Luxury vacations, designer clothes, spa treatments. "This is the woman who claims I starved her," I said. "I supported her for 3 years. I paid her rent. I paid her credit cards. I bought the dress she was wearing when she handed me a badge that said, Observer." I turned off the screen. The atrium was dead silent. The reporters were looking at their phones, realizing they had been scooped by reality. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the villain. I was the donor. And she was the parasite. "Courtney Whitman is not a victim," I said, my voice hard. "She is a con artist. She used your outrage to try and extort money from me. She used a child that hasn't even been born yet as a weapon. And she used you, the press, to do her dirty work." I stepped back from the podium. "I have filed a defamation suit against Mrs. Carter this morning," I said. "And I have turned all this footage over to the police as evidence in the fraud investigation. Thank you for your time." I turned and walked away. But I wasn't done. The atrium was just the beginning. I had rented digital billboard space. I wanted to make sure everyone saw it. As I walked back to the elevators, I looked out the glass doors toward the city center. In the distance, a massive digital billboard that usually showed Coca-Cola ads flickered and changed. Suddenly, Courtney's face was 40 feet tall. It was the still frame from the security footage the moment she handed me the badge. The caption underneath was simple: "The real observer." Traffic was slowing down. People were pointing. Phones were coming out. I went up to my office and turned on the TV. The news channels had cut away from their regular programming. They were playing the security footage. They were dissecting Courtney's lies. The pundits who had been calling for my head 10 minutes ago were now calling for hers. The internet, which had been a mob of pitchforks, turned into a firing squad. The hashtag changed. It went from cancel Winston to exposed Courtney. People were digging up her old posts, her old photos, her old lies. They found pictures of her in the Maldives with the captions about being a self-made girl boss. They found tweets where she mocked poor people. They were tearing her apart with the same ferocity they had reserved for me. My phone rang. It was not a reporter. It was Courtney. I picked it up and put it on speaker. "You monster," she screamed. Her voice was raw, hysterical. "You ruined me. Everyone is laughing at me. I can't even go outside. They are throwing things at the motel window." "You ruined yourself, Courtney," I said. "I just turned on the lights." "Take it down," she begged. "Please, take the billboards down. Stop the news. I will do anything. I will sign the papers. I will go away. Just make it stop." "It stops when you tell the truth," I said. "Go online. Go on that same account where you lied about me. And tell them the truth. Tell them you lied. Tell them you stole. Tell them everything." "I can't," she sobbed. "They will kill me." "Then you better get used to the noise," I said, "because I bought that billboard space for a month." I hung up. I looked at the screen on my wall. The news anchor was shaking his head, talking about the audacity of the hoax. They were showing Richard's mugshot now side by side with the video of him being arrested. The Whitman family brand was dead. It wasn't just damaged. It was incinerated. I sat down at my desk. I felt a deep exhaustion settling into my bones. It was the fatigue of a soldier who has survived the battle but knows the war has taken a piece of his soul. I had won, but it was a victory of ashes. I looked at the picture on my desk. It was an old photo of me and Terrence when he was a boy holding a fishing pole. He looked so happy. He looked so innocent. I put the photo in the drawer. That boy was gone, and the man who replaced him was somewhere in Texas digging a hole in the ground trying to find the bottom so he could start climbing out. I opened the file for the new project, a scholarship fund for trade schools. I was done investing in entitlement. I was going to invest in work. The sun went down over Atlanta. The billboard in the distance kept glowing, cycling through the images of my betrayal. It was a warning light, a beacon. It said, "Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake kindness for blindness. And never ever forget who owns the house." The dust settled over Atlanta, but it did not settle on a victory parade. It settled on a graveyard of reputations. The Whitman name, which Richard had spent 40 years polishing until it shined like fool's gold, was now toxic. In the business world, reputation is currency, and the Whitmans were bankrupt. I watched their descent not with joy, but with the cold, clinical detachment of an auditor reviewing a failed ledger. Richard Whitman, the man who once threatened to have me thrown out of his country club, found employment 3 weeks after his arrest. He was not managing a construction firm. He was not sitting on a board of directors. He was standing at the entrance of a discount mart in a strip mall off the highway. I drove by once just to verify the reports from my private investigator. There he was wearing a polyester uniform that was a size too small, the fabric straining against his paunch. He wore a plastic name tag that simply said, "Dick." He spent his days checking receipts and chasing teenagers who tried to steal energy drinks. When he saw a former business associate walk in, he would turn his back pretending to arrange the shopping carts, his face burning with a shame so deep it radiated heat. He was a king who had become a court jester, and the kingdom was laughing. Susan did not fare much better. Without Richard's income and without the social standing she craved, like oxygen, she spiraled. She moved into a small apartment with Courtney and tried to reinvent herself as an entrepreneur. But Susan did not know how to build. She only knew how to take. She started selling counterfeit designer handbags on social media, claiming they were vintage pieces from her personal collection. It worked for a week until a buyer realized the stitching on a Louis Vuitton was polyester. The police raided the apartment. They confiscated the fake inventory and charged her with trademark counterfeiting. The video of Susan being led out of the apartment building, screaming that she was a victim of a conspiracy, was viewed 2 million times. She was no longer a socialite. She was a meme. And then there was Courtney. The architect of my destruction had become the architect of her own hell. The lawsuits came in waves. The brands she had tagged in her defamatory videos sued her for damages. The crowdfunding platform sued her for fraud after freezing the donations she had solicited under false pretenses. Her credit score plummeted into the double digits. She was unbankable. She was unhireable. She was radioactive. Even the friends who had supported her initially quietly unfollowed her and stopped returning her calls. She was alone in a crowded room of her own making. I sat in my office signing the acquisition papers for a new warehouse when the receptionist called. "Mr. Carter," she said, "there is a woman in the lobby. She says it is urgent. She says she has something you want." I checked the security feed. It was Courtney. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had worn silver on New Year's Eve. Her clothes were baggy. Her hair was unwashed. She looked thin except for the swell of her stomach. "Send her up," I said. I waited by the window. When she entered, she did not scream. She did not point fingers. She walked with the heavy trudge of the defeated. She sat down in the chair opposite my desk without being asked. She placed her hands on her belly. "I want to make a deal," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I do not make deals with terrorists, Courtney," I said, returning to my paperwork. "I am not a terrorist," she said. "I am a mother, and this is your grandson." She rubbed her stomach, staring at me with dead eyes. "I am leaving Atlanta," she said. "I am going to California. I have a cousin there. I am going to start over." "That sounds like a wise plan," I said. "I need money," she said. "I need $50,000. Cash." I stopped writing. I looked up at her. "You come into my office after everything you did, after the lies, after the videos, and you ask me for $50,000. It is not for me," she said quickly. "It is for the move. It is for the baby. If you give me the money, I will sign a document. I will agree to never contact you again. I will disappear. You will never have to see my face again." "And the baby?" I asked. She looked away. "The baby goes with me, obviously. But if you don't pay, if you let me walk out of here with nothing, I cannot guarantee his safety. I am stressed, Winston. I am not eating well. Stress is bad for the baby. If something happens to him, it will be on your conscience." I stared at her. It was the final card, the ultimate threat. She was insinuating that she would neglect my grandchild, or worse, if I didn't pay her extortion fee. She was holding an innocent life hostage for a payout. "Is that a threat, Courtney?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It is a reality," she said, looking back at me with a flash of her old defiance. "I am broke. I am desperate. Desperate people make bad choices. If you want this baby to be born healthy, you will pay me. If you want to ever see him, you will pay me. 50,000. It is nothing to you. It is pocket change." She was right about the money. 50,000 was nothing to me. But the principle was everything. If I paid her now, she would never stop. She would come back in a year asking for more. She would use the child as an ATM for the rest of his life. I could not let that happen. I could not let my bloodline be raised by a woman who saw a child as a bargaining chip. I stood up and walked around the desk. I leaned against the front of it, crossing my arms. "You are right, Courtney," I said. "The baby needs protection. The baby needs a stable environment. The baby needs a parent who puts his needs above her own greed. So you will pay?" she asked, hope flaring in her eyes. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded document. It was not a check. I handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, taking it suspiciously. "It is a court order," I said, "signed by Judge Holloway an hour ago." She unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the legal text. Her hands began to shake. The paper rattled in the quiet office. "Temporary emergency custody," she whispered. "What is this?" "It is exactly what it says," I explained. "I petitioned the court for emergency custody of the unborn child upon birth. I submitted into evidence every video you posted. I submitted the police reports regarding your false filings. I submitted the financial records showing your insolvency. And I submitted the sworn testimony of your former friends who stated you referred to the pregnancy as a payday." "You can't do this!" she screamed, dropping the paper. "It is my baby! You can't take my baby!" "The state disagrees," I said. "The court found that you present a clear and present danger to the welfare of the child. Your behavior is erratic, your financial situation is catastrophic, and your public statements indicate a willingness to exploit the child for gain. You are unfit, Courtney." "No," she wailed, backing away. "I will run. I will leave the state. You will never find me." "Read the last paragraph," I said. She looked at the paper on the floor. "There is a travel ban," I said. "Your passport is flagged. If you try to leave the state of Georgia while pregnant, you will be arrested for kidnapping and contempt of court. You are grounded, Courtney. You are going to stay right here. You are going to carry that baby to term. And when he is born, he is coming home with me." She fell to her knees. It was a mirror image of Terrence in this same office weeks ago, but But this time there was no pity in my heart. There was only the fierce protective instinct of a grandfather. "Please," she sobbed. "Winston, please. He is all I have left. He is the only thing I have. He is not a thing," I roared, my voice shaking the walls. "He is a person. He is a Carter. And I will be damned if I let you turn him into another Whitman. I will not let you poison him with your entitlement. I will not let you teach him that love is transactional." I calmed myself, taking a deep breath. "You will have visitation," I said. "Supervised visitation. Once you complete a parenting course and pass a psychological evaluation. I am not a monster. I will not erase you. But you will never have control over him. You will never use him to hurt me." Courtney looked up at me. She looked shattered. The last vestige of her power had been stripped away. She had tried to play the ultimate trump card, and I had trumped it. "You took everything," she whispered. "My husband, my house, my money, my reputation, and now my baby." "I didn't take anything, Courtney," I said. "I recovered what was mine, and I protected what was vulnerable. You threw it all away with both hands because you thought you were better than everyone else. You thought the rules didn't apply to you." I walked back to my desk and pressed the intercom. "Security, please escort Ms. Whitman from the building." Courtney stood up slowly. She looked at me with dead eyes. "I wish I had never met you," she said. "I wish you had been the woman my son thought you were," I replied. 2 security guards entered the office. They took Courtney by the arms. She didn't fight, she didn't scream, she just let them lead her away, a broken woman walking into a future she had destroyed. I sat alone in my office. The document lay on the floor where she had dropped it. I picked it up and smoothed it out. Temporary custody. It was a piece of paper, but it weighed a ton. I was 70 years old. I was about to become a father figure again. I was about to change diapers and warm bottles. I was about to start over. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city. I thought about Terrence in Texas sweating in the sun. I thought about the baby growing in Courtney's womb. I thought about the legacy I had fought so hard to build. It was messy. It was painful. It was imperfect. But it was safe. The leeches were gone. The parasites had been removed. The foundation had been scrubbed clean. I went to my safe and opened it. I took out a small velvet box. Inside was a silver rattle. It had belonged to Terrence. I had kept it for 30 years. I rubbed my thumb over the tarnished silver. "I will get it right this time," I whispered to the empty room. "I will teach him the value of work. I will teach him the value of respect. And I will teach him that no matter where he goes or how high he climbs, he always has a seat at my table." I put the rattle in my pocket. I had a nursery to build, and this time I was going to build it myself. The air off the lake was biting cold, just as it had been exactly 1 year ago. But tonight, the atmosphere inside the lakeside estate was different. There were no rented tuxedos. There were no caterers serving hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. There was the smell of hickory smoke from the barbecue pit out back and the sound of genuine laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. I stood by the fireplace swirling a glass of bourbon, watching the room. It was New Year's Eve again. The anniversary of the night I was handed a plastic badge and told I didn't belong. The anniversary of the night the Whitman dynasty crumbled. The house looked better now. I had stripped out the pretentious white marble floors Courtney had insisted on and restored the original warm oak. I had removed the abstract art that cost more than a house and replaced it with photos of my wife Beatrice and landscapes of the city I helped build. The furniture was leather and wood built to last, not just to look good on Instagram. My guests tonight were not socialites or politicians. Mike Kowalski was there drinking a beer and telling stories about his days in the Corps. Sophia Morales was sitting on the couch laughing at something Sheriff Davis was saying. These were people who had stood by me when I was just a mechanic, people who knew the value of loyalty. But there was one person missing. I checked my watch, 11:15. Mike walked over and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "He might not come, Winston," Mike said quietly. "I worked him hard in Midland. I didn't cut him any slack because he was your son. In fact, I rode him harder. He might hate us both. He needed to be ridden hard," I said, staring into the fire. "Did he quit?" Mike shook his head. "He tried to. About 2 weeks in. He packed his bag and walked to the highway. Stood there for an hour. Then he turned around, walked back to the bunkhouse and put his boots on. He didn't miss a shift after that. He got quiet. He got angry. But he worked." I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. I walked over to the window. The long driveway was dark, illuminated only by the landscaping lights. I remembered seeing the taillights of the Ferraris fleeing the property last year. I remembered the feeling of absolute isolation. I had won the war, but I had been terrified that I had lost the future. The gate buzzer sounded. The room went quiet. Sophia looked at me. Sheriff Davis stopped talking. They all knew what tonight was. They knew I had sent a ticket. I pressed the intercom button. Yes, delivery. A voice crackled. Open the gate, I said. I watched through the window. A yellow taxicab drove up the winding path. It wasn't a limousine. It wasn't a Bentley. It was a beat-up sedan with a rattling muffler. It stopped in front of the main entrance. The back door opened. A pair of work boots hit the pavement. They were scuffed, covered in dried mud and oil stains. Then came the jeans worn white at the knees. Then a heavy canvas jacket. Terrence stepped out. He looked different. He had lost at least 20 pounds. The soft, doughy look of the tech CEO was gone, replaced by the lean, hard lines of a laborer. His skin was dark-tanned by the relentless Texas sun. His hair was cut short military style. He grabbed a duffel bag from the back seat. He didn't look at the house with awe or entitlement. He looked at it with a strange mixture of apprehension and recognition. I walked to the front door. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a rhythm I hadn't felt since I was in the trenches. I opened the door. Terrence stood at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at me. His eyes were clear. The arrogance was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a quiet exhaustion. "Hello, Dad," he said. His voice was deeper, rougher. "Hello, son," I replied. "You are late." "The flight was delayed," he said, "and I took the bus from the airport. I didn't want to spend the extra money on an Uber." I nodded. "Come in. It is freezing out here." He walked up the steps. As he passed me, I smelled him. He didn't smell like expensive cologne anymore. He smelled like diesel fuel and sweat and earth. He smelled like work. He stepped into the foyer. He looked around. He saw the changes I had made. He saw the oak floors. He saw the pictures of his mother. "It looks good," he said softly. "It looks like a home." "It is a home," I said. Mike Kowalski stepped forward, grinning. "Hey, kid," Mike boomed. "You survived." Terrence managed a small, tired smile. "Barely, Mike. You are a slave driver." "I kept you alive, didn't I?" Mike laughed, shaking Terrence's hand. "And look at that grip. You couldn't squeeze a lemon a year ago. Now you could crush a rock." Terrence looked at his own hands. They were calloused, scarred, and rough. They were the hands of a carter. Sophia came over and gave him a polite nod. "Welcome back, Terrence." "Hi, Sophia," he said. "Thank you. For everything. Even the hard parts." The clock chimed. 11:30. "Dinner is served," I said. I led the way into the dining room. It was the same room where the disaster had happened, the same long mahogany table. But tonight it wasn't set for 20 strangers. It was set for 5. There were place cards, simple handwritten notes. I walked to the head of the table. "Everyone take your seats," I said. Mike sat on my left. Sophia sat next to him. Sheriff Davis sat on the other side. That left one chair, the chair to my right, the seat of honor. Terrence stood by the door. He was looking at the table. He was looking for the stool. He was looking for the badge. He seemed to be waiting for the punchline, waiting to be told he wasn't welcome. I pulled out the chair to my right. The wood scraped softly against the floor. "Sit down, son," I said. Terrence looked at the chair. He looked at me. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't let them fall. He blinked them away. He walked over to the table. He touched the back of the chair as if testing it to make sure it was real. "This is for me," he asked. "It is for family," I said, repeating the words Susan Whitman had used to destroy him, but using them now to heal him. "And you are family." He sat down. He sat tall. He didn't slump. He looked like he belonged there, not because of his last name, but because he had walked through fire to get there. We ate. It wasn't foie gras. It was steak and potatoes and cornbread, real food. We talked. Terrence told stories about the oil fields. He talked about the heat, about the danger, about the camaraderie of the crew. He talked about how he had learned to weld, how he had learned to operate a backhoe. He didn't talk about algorithms or stock prices. He talked about building things. As the meal wound down, the clock ticked closer to midnight, 11:55. Terrence cleared his throat. He reached into the pocket of his canvas jacket. He pulled out a white envelope. It was stained with sweat and dirt. He pushed his plate aside and placed the envelope on the table. He slid it toward me. "What is this?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew. "It is $500, Terrence said. I looked at the envelope. $500, I repeated. "It is not much," he said, his voice steady. "I know I owe you $2 million. I know I can probably never pay it all back, but this is my first installment." I picked up the envelope. It felt light, but I knew how heavy it was. "I made $18 an hour by the end," Terrence said. "I worked overtime every week. I saved everything I didn't need for food in the bunkhouse. It took me a year to save $5,000. I spent most of it on the lawyers for the custody battle with Courtney. But this is for you. For what I asked. For the rent," he said, looking me in the eye. "For the 5 years I lived here and didn't appreciate it. For the space I took up. For the seat at the table." I held the envelope. $500. It was a drop in the bucket of my wealth. I made that much in interest every hour. But coming from him, earned with sweat and blood in the Texas dirt, it was the most valuable money I had ever seen. He wasn't trying to buy my forgiveness with a credit card he didn't pay for. He was offering me the fruit of his labor. He was offering me his dignity. I looked at him. I saw the lines around his eyes. I saw the gray starting to show in his temples. He had aged 10 years in one, but he was a man. Finally, he was a man. I opened the envelope. I pulled out the stack of $20 bills. They were worn and wrinkled. I counted them out on the table, one by one. Then I reached into my own pocket. I pulled out a small silver key. I placed the key on top of the stack of cash. I slid the pile back across the table to him. Terrence frowned, looking at the key. "What is this?" I stood up. "You don't owe me rent, Terrence," I said. "You paid your rent in Midland. You paid it when you didn't quit. You paid it when you chose to work instead of beg." I pointed to the key. "That is for the truck in the driveway," I said. "It is a Ford F-150, heavy duty, tow package, toolbox in the back. It is not a Bentley. It is a work truck." Terrence picked up the key. His hand closed around it. "I checked with the board of directors," I said, glancing at Mike and Sophia. "We have a vacancy in the logistics division. We need a manager for the fleet, someone who knows engines, someone who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, someone I can trust." Terrence stood up slowly. "You want me to work for you? I want you to work with me," I corrected. "Starting salary is fair, not CEO money, but enough to get an apartment, enough to start saving for your son's education." He looked at the money. He looked at the key. He looked at me. "Dad," he choked out. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," I said. "Just take your seat. You bought it back." The clock on the mantel began to chime. Dong, dong, dong. Midnight. Outside, the first fireworks from the city began to explode, lighting up the sky over the lake in bursts of red and gold. I picked up my glass of bourbon. "To the new year," I said, raising my glass. Terrence picked up his glass. His hand was steady. "To the new year," he repeated. We clinked glasses. The sound rang clear and true in the quiet room. "Welcome home, son," I said. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "It is good to be back, Dad." I looked out the window at the fireworks reflecting on the dark water. The year of the observer was over. The year of the builder had begun. I had my house back. I had my company. And most importantly, I had my son. The leeches were gone, the debts were paid, and the foundation was solid. And as I took a sip of my drink, I knew that this time we were going to build something that would last forever. Looking back, I realized that for years I confused enabling with loving. I thought writing checks was being a good father, but I was just robbing my son of his own strength. You cannot buy respect, and you cannot build a man by shielding him from the world. True family isn't about who sits at the head of the table, it is about who is willing to work to get there. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone fall so they can learn how to stand up on their own. Dignity has a price, and it is paid in sweat, not dollars. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to use tough love to save someone you care about?